subscribe, like the video, and, if possible, join Patreon. But if you don't have much money, you can support the channel by watching the novels on euroaudiobooks.com. Remember that you can participate in the polls so that your favorite novel gets published for free.
Completely. After separating the infusion and the instrument probe, Cal pressed the wound on his left shoulder with his hand. He could still vaguely feel a little pain, and then he leaned his back comfortably against the headboard. The tables on both sides of the bed were filled with flowers and fruits. The breeze blew up the gauze curtains, and through the window, you could see the blue sky and the forest and grassland. The environment outside was very quiet and peaceful. Where was I transported to? Cal was confused. This was obviously not a frontline combat zone or a training base. But who cares? It doesn't matter where I am, as long as I'm still alive and healthy. Kyle, who had received the amazing ability, felt a little hungry, so he immediately picked up the apple on the table and stuffed it into his mouth, biting it into his stomach with a crunching sound to relieve the hunger that was rising in his heart. When Kyle picked up the third apple, the door of the ward was suddenly opened. He bit the apple in his hand and subconsciously looked up. This sight is astonishing. What appeared before Kyle was a delicate face like an angel, with big clear blue eyes, pink lips, and bright blonde hair that fell slightly in curls on the shoulders. The girl was wearing a sky blue knee-length skirt. Her immature body outlined graceful curves, and her arms exposed to the air were slender and white. This is the second top-notch European and American beauty Kyle has seen since his rebirth. The first one is Carter from the training base, but Carter gives people more of a mature and cold beauty charm, while the girl in front of him has more of a cute and moving beauty. The girl was slightly startled when she saw Kyle biting an apple, and then she shouted to the door excitedly like a rabbit. "Doctor, doctor! Kyle is awake! It's her!" Kyle was stunned. When he heard the familiar voice, he realized that this girl was the one he rescued from the German base. It was really because it was too dark at that time, and I couldn't see clearly. In addition, the girl's face was weak and pale, and her body was tied up very badly. She was completely different from now. "Hey, you can't eat apples like this. You have to peel them." After notifying the doctor, the girl quickly returned to the ward and snatched half of the apple from Kyle's hand. "Why are you here?" Kyle just opened his mouth, then realized that he had asked the wrong question and quickly changed the subject to ask, "Well, where am I?" The girl replied, "We are at the first military hospital of the United States in New York. You were rescued at a temporary base on the front line, and after your condition stabilized, you were sent here by a transport plane for rehabilitation treatment. So that's how it is?" Kyle nodded thoughtfully. "You don't know, the bullet not only hit your left shoulder, but was also less than a few centimeters away from your heart. I was really scared when you were rescuing you. Fortunately, you have a very strong and superior physique," the girl said, moving closer to Kyle and reaching out to touch his white bandage. "What are you doing?" Kyle looked at her in surprise. At this distance, he could faintly smell the fragrance of her golden hair. "Help you change the bandage. My parents are both doctors and nurses, so I'm good at this kind of small thing." When the girl said this, a look of sadness appeared on her pretty face. Kyle naturally understood that since she was a prisoner, her family and friends in the area should have been shot by the invading German army. Sensing that the atmosphere was getting tense, Kyle forced himself to start a conversation. Well, I didn't expect that you can take care of people. Of course, you have to understand that what you saved from the enemy base was not just a bunch of supplies." The girl stuck out her pink tongue. Maybe she was remembering the night she was tied to Kyle's back. Her face was a little red with shame. "Besides, I have a name. Lucy Jane. You can just call me Lucy." "Got it." Kyle smiled and let Lucy change the bandage on the wound gently and skillfully. Soon, the doctor in charge, who was also the vice president, came to the ward in a hurry to check Kyle's injuries. "Doctor, how is he?" Lucille asked nervously. "It's okay." The doctor in charge smiled, pushed up his glasses, and said to Kyle, "I never thought that an ordinary person would have to lie in bed for a month, but you have basically recovered in a week. In about 3 days, you can be officially discharged from the hospital." "It'll take another 3 days." Kyle shrugged helplessly. His physique, which seemed to be top-notch to others, was really weak in his eyes. The doctor in charge confirmed that the injury was not serious and left the ward, leaving a message before leaving. By the way, an officer asked me to inform him when you wake up. I just called him, and I think he will come here to visit soon. Any officers visiting? Kyle scratched his head. It was not hard to guess. He knew less than 10 officers, and only had good relations with 1 or 2 of them. After a while, when the officer knocked on the door and walked into the ward, Kyle showed an expression that he had guessed it right, but he still pretended to be surprised and asked, "Captain Joseph, why are you here?" That's right. The officer who came to visit him was the combat instructor at the training base who had allowed Kyle to draw several green physical fitness cards. "Stinky boy, why can't I come?" Officer Joseph laughed and scolded without any airs, but when he saw Lucy in the ward, he couldn't help but cough and straightened up seriously. "Oh, so there are family members here?" Lucy, who was peeling an apple, lowered her head shyly and did not refute. Chapter 20. Continuous jump in military rank. Stop talking nonsense. "Sir, what are you doing here?" "I'm injured right now and can't spar with you." Kyle also teased Joseph, with whom he had a good relationship. "You little brat, you are really amazing. You have brought honor to our training base." Commander Joseph, like before, changed the subject halfway through his words, turning the original scolding into praise. "I've heard about you. You went to the front line, were promoted to corporal in just 3 days, obtained important intelligence about the enemy camp, led a 100-man troop, penetrated deep into the enemy camp alone, and annihilated an entire large enemy base with a small force." Commander Joseph gave a thumbs up with emotion as he spoke. "You are amazing. Do you know how important this frontline counterattack was to our army? We destroyed a large enemy base, 3 medium-sized camps, and a transit battle. The situation in the frontline combat zone was reversed. All the military units and even the whole country went crazy about this perfect counterattack. As the greatest contributor to this counterattack, you are a national hero and an idol to all soldiers. This has sparked a wave of young people joining the army in the past few days. Compared to being promoted to corporal in 3 days, Kyle truly became famous in one battle this time. Don't praise me like that. I'll be proud." Kyle chuckled, his young and handsome face brimming with confidence. Captain America, who only possesses the physique of a super soldier, was able to shine during World War II. And since he has an even more versatile and powerful card drawing system, how difficult is it for him to become a mere American hero? However, thanks to this battle, his reputation in the army was greatly improved, which was a bit beyond Kyle's expectations. Kyle blinked and asked Joseph expectantly, "By the way, I have made such a great military achievement. Has the commander-in-chief given me a promotion?" "You kid, you're already a corporal, but you're still thinking about your military rank." Officer Joseph blew his big beard in dissatisfaction and said with a stern face, "Military merits should be accumulated step by step. The important thing is to repel the German Nazis and defend the country. However, you did make great contributions in this counterattack, and your military rank has been promoted a little bit." Kyle got the point from these words and asked, "How much is a little bit?" "Look for yourself." Officer Joseph seemed not to want to say more. He took out a soldier's ID from his military uniform pocket and threw it over. Kyle quickly took it and opened the document. It was indeed his newly registered personal soldier certificate, with a black and white headshot of him registered when he joined the army. Kyle Dolph, male, 22 years old, rank of ensign in the U.S. Navy. It's actually a second lieutenant? Kyle was shocked. This was not just a little bit, it was a huge jump. There are 2 ranks between corporal and second lieutenant, which means he jumped 3 levels at once. Kyle jumped 3 ranks from soldier to corporal, but that was after all the rank of corporal, the lowest officer position. This time, however, the position he jumped to was a genuine officer position. "Captain Joseph, you seem to be a second lieutenant yourself, right?" Kyle looked at Joseph's stern face with a strange expression and suddenly understood why the other party was unhappy. "Are you happy now? You don't have to call me sir anymore." Joseph gritted his teeth. He was a soldier under his command 2 weeks ago, but now he has the same position as him? Do you dare to think? Joseph grumbled like a nagging woman. "It took me 10 years to slowly climb up to the rank of second lieutenant, but you took less than 10 days. You really made me proud. Something is wrong. Even if I have made many military achievements, One battle is not enough for me to be promoted to second lieutenant, right? Kyle asked doubtfully, with many conspiracy theories emerging in his mind. So, you have encountered a rare opportunity in a century. Joseph sighed and answered, now is the time of World War II, and the country urgently needs to set an example to inspire young people to join the army and increase the morale of the army. And you happen to take the initiative to stand up, so the rank of second lieutenant will naturally be given to you. Joseph paused, then smiled and said, you are not like Captain America, who gets his title through promotional videos and singing and dancing. You have earned your heroic aura through your real strength and achievements. Captain America. Kyle's heart was shocked, and he asked urgently, is it Steve? That's right. Joseph pulled out a cutout of the New York Times from his pocket and said indignantly, after the super soldier experiment was successful, the guy's physique did undergo an amazing change. But he didn't go to the battlefield. Instead, he made military propaganda videos with politicians every day and sang and danced to raise funds to protect against bonds, creating a reputation for himself as Captain America's Justice. Kyle quickly took the newspaper. Lucy helped him spread it out, and they both looked at it visually. On the front of the newspaper, there was a black and white photo that took up a large area of the paper. It showed a young man wearing a blue and white striped tights, with a righteous and handsome face and a tall and strong figure. Every extra E-Series bond you buy is an extra bullet for a soldier on the battlefield who is strong and brave enough to save America from disaster. Hurry up and respond to Captain America's call and join our battle. This type of English banner is printed in bold above the title and subtitle of the newspaper. It's really Steve. Kyle smiled. He could vaguely see a hint of his past weakness in the tall young man in the newspaper. Captain America, Marvel's first man-made hero, is finally introduced. Although it initially appeared as a funny and ridiculous political propaganda method. Joseph, I don't have any mission yet, right? I haven't seen Steve for 2 weeks. I want to see him. I hope you can help me. Kyle looked at Joseph eagerly, forcibly suppressing the expectation in his heart. The super soldier's ability card must be obtained as soon as possible. He has had enough of being limited to the top human physical level. Is that so? Joseph frowned. He personally disliked Steve very much, but since Kyle had made the request, he had no reason to refuse. Joseph could only nod and agree. Let's do this. Steve is not in New York now, but traveling around the United States to promote. However, in 2 days, he will hold a promotional speech at the European training base, and I will also return. I will come to pick you up in advance. Okay, I can still wait for the next 2 days. Kyle nodded in agreement and quietly clenched his fists. Successfully drawing the super soldier ability card is a big step towards his rise in this Marvel world. Chapter 21. Double card draw number 1 Military Hospital of the United States noon. Since it was a war period, there were many injured officers and soldiers receiving treatment in the hospital, as well as family members coming to visit. However, because it was a military hospital, everyone here was very well behaved and kept their voices down for fear of disturbing others. Kyle was wearing clothes reserved for patients as he walked through the hospital's lobby corridor. His young and handsome face immediately attracted the attention of many people of the opposite sex. Thanks to the fact that information dissemination today is not as crazy as it was in the 21st century, few people recognize that Kyle is the biggest contributor to the recent counterattack. In fact, Kyle, the youngest second lieutenant in the United States, is not as famous as Steve, who is known as Captain America. Facing the nurse's expressive glances, Kyle responded with a smile, walked out of the hospital building, and came to the green park outside. It was a sunny day. The trees and grass were lush green, and the pool and fountain were sparkling with bright light, which was very pleasing to the eye and suitable for recuperation. Of course, Kyle is not someone who can rest patiently. He took a few deep breaths of the fresh air and began to stretch his muscles and do some warm-up exercises, which was a set of regular military boxing. After a set, my bones felt relaxed and crackling like beans. Warm blood filled my stiff and sluggish body, and my face looked much rosier. Comfortable. Kyle exhaled a breath of hot air, although his unhealed left shoulder protested with pain. For him who was accustomed to the combat environment, It was much more comfortable than lying sick in the hospital bed. He will go to the training base with Joseph tomorrow, and he doesn't want to look so listless. Since he has agreed to walk ahead of Steve, of course he has to do everything perfectly. I don't know when Kyle has developed his own pride and principles. Oh, I almost forgot about the spoils of the counterattack. Kyle was sweating profusely. He sat on a park chair, closed his eyes as if taking a rest, and his mind quietly entered the card space. Compared to previous battles, there are no huge amounts of white space filled with cluttered white and green item cards. But the harvest this time is greater than any previous battle. There are only 25 unclassified blue item cards, placed prominently above the center of the card vortex. Each one is a block of infinite energy that can give modified guns amazing destructive power. However, when Kyle saw the infinite energy blocks of blue item grade, he had already figured out what to use them for. Instead of using this energy to consume guns and cannons, it is better to use it as material cards for sacrificing and drawing cards. After sacrificing 2 blue cards, even if I don't get a card that exceeds the blue grade, at least I'll have 2 blue cards, which can greatly enhance my personal strength. Kyle floated the 25 blue item cards right in front of the incarnation of his mind with great anticipation. The difference between the lower and upper limits of the sacrifice card drawing is outrageous, because there is a possibility of drawing anything. Sometimes a pit that causes huge losses can also bring you unexpected gains. Stealth. The blue ability card is the best product of sacrifice and card drawing. Without the stealth ability, Kyle wouldn't be able to break into the enemy base alone, let alone reach the gate of the base. Goddess of Victory in New York, bless me and give me some luck. I must make the goods. Kyle seemed to have returned to the lottery drawing stage of the game in his previous life. He was excited and nervous and tremblingly sacrificed 10 blue item cards first. Sacrifice Extraction. You sacrificed. Remaining gem energy X10. The extraction was successful. Congratulations on obtaining Blue Eagle. A blue card that was obviously of the biology type appeared in front of Kyle's eyes. The blue light on the card was shining brightly, indicating its extraordinary grade coefficient. For the first time, a blue rare card comes out directly. Kyle didn't expect his luck to suddenly explode. Getting a blue rare card was already a big win. He quickly took the new card and examined it. Blue Eagle. A strange bird creature that lives on a cliff 10,000 meters high. Blue rare card. It is 3 times larger than a normal goshawk with a wingspan of up to 10 meters. Its feathers are dark blue, and it has outstanding vitality and defensive abilities, able to withstand ordinary thermal weapon attacks. It can see 10,000 meters away and emit sonic attacks. Its maximum flying speed is Mach 4, and the speed is halved when there are people on board. A rare flying mount? Kyle was dumbfounded. If it were in an online game, this would definitely be a rare mount exclusively for the rich. In the Marvel world, this Blue Eagle can already be classified as an alien monster. The maximum speed can reach Mach 4, which is faster than the flying speed of a fighter jet. Kyle pondered. He personally really liked the Blue Eagle, but it was a pity that its special existence meant that it could not be used normally. It can be guessed that he is now flying in the real world on a Blue Eagle or directly summoning a Blue Eagle to kill the enemy. I'm afraid it will either be killed by its own country's fighter jets or be captured and dissected by a group of biologists in a research institute. In terms of practicality, the rare Blue Eagle is probably not as good as the rare green poisonous hornet's nest. Let's put it aside for now. It may come in handy in certain circumstances in the future. After all, this is the first blue rare card in my life. Kyle consoled himself and listed the Blue Eagle in the emergency available space area for emergency use. Next, the second sacrifice card draw. After this draw, the remaining 5 gem energy are not enough to draw again. Please give me a card that is more practical. Kyle did not forget to pray. Now he understood that the most important thing about a card is its practicality. A card that is suitable for current use is a top-notch card. You sacrificed. Remaining gem energy X10. The extraction was successful. Congratulations on obtaining Vibranium Arm Guard. Vibranium, what a great thing. As soon as Kyle heard the name of the new card, his nervous face was filled with excitement. After all, Any item with a vibranium prefix can't be that bad. Vibranium, the top material in the Marvel world, has its origin only in Black Panther's hidden country, Wakanda. In today's outside world, only the shield that Captain America will hold in the future is forged with vibranium. Kyle excitedly grabbed the new item card in his hand and looked at its properties in detail. Vibranium arm guard. Right arm guard forged from pure vibranium. Blue item card. It can perfectly accommodate the holder's right arm and can easily offset various physical damage and thermal weapon impacts. Isn't this the equivalent of the right-hand part of the Black Panther suit, just without the claws? Kyle was satisfied. Although it is not an ability card, it is also a high-tech equipment that he really needs now. The super soldier physique, vibranium arm guards, and stealth skills that he will soon possess will make Kyle truly invincible on the battlefield. Chapter 22. Goodbye, Steve. The next morning, after finishing his breakfast early in the hospital, Kyle changed into the new officer uniform that Joseph had sent to him in the ward, as well as the badge with the rank of second lieutenant. Lucy paid more attention to Kyle's appearance than Kyle himself. She went around and straightened the collar and sleeves of his officer's uniform, and carefully smoothed out the slightest wrinkles on the clothes with her hands. "I'm not going to a celebrity banquet. There's no need to act so gentlemanly, right?" Kyle said jokingly. Lucy seemed to be worried and remained silent. "What's wrong? Did anyone bully you?" Kyle continued. Lucy seemed to have mustered up her courage and asked nervously, "Kyle, are you going back to the battlefield with that bearded officer?" "The battlefield is not that fast yet, and the mission has not been assigned yet. I just went to the recruit base where I trained before." Kyle looked at her and smiled and said, "What's wrong? Even if you are an officer, it is normal to go to the battlefield now." "Then can I go with you?" Lucy lowered her head and pinched her hands together in a tangled way. Kyle said with a straight face, "Lucy, you thought the battlefield was a fun place. Have you forgotten how you escaped? But my family members all died on the battlefield, and I have no home either. If you are gone too, then I will," Lucy said, tears welling up in her beautiful big eyes. "That's a problem." Kyle stroked his chin, thought for a while, and said, "I got it. My home was originally here in New York, but my parents died in the previous war, and now it's empty and no one lives there. If you don't mind, you can live there first." He had read his own file documents at the training base and knew that he was an orphan before joining the army and lived in a retro villa left by his deceased parents. The house keys are kept at a storage facility in New York and can be retrieved with an ID. "Living in your house?" Lucy opened her eyes wide, and her fair face turned pink. Kyle's words had another meaning to her. Isn't this just living together in advance? Even though the other party is not often at home, you can stay as long as you want. Kyle smiled and touched Lucy's golden hair lovingly. For the time being, he didn't have any other thoughts about Lucy and just treated her as a close sister. "Brother Kyle, you were so nice to me." Lucy's eyes were full of joy. She quickly stood on tiptoe and kissed Kyle on the cheek. Then, like a frightened rabbit, she ran away from the room with a blushing face. "Well, this is really..." A subtle feeling came to his mind. Kyle touched the cheek that was kissed secretly and quickly put the thought behind him. Now is not the time to talk about feelings comfortably. We must continue to become stronger, strong enough to face all unexpected crises in this world. Kyle has to accumulate military merits, get promoted to higher ranks, gain certain prestige and power, and even wealth. There are still many things waiting for him to work hard for. Reborn in Marvel. If you just want to be an ordinary person, it would be a shame to the card-drawing ability given by God. Kyle has his own life blueprint, waiting to be painted and colored. Around 8 o'clock in the morning, Joseph personally drove a Jeep to pick up Kyle and take him to the military airfield. Kyle said goodbye to Lucy in New York, and then boarded a transport plane with Joseph to return to the original training base. At this time, at the training base on the other side, the military specially built a speech stage in the open space of the square, and Steve gave a speech as Captain America, but it was politically motivated. The base commander issued an order early on, forcing all soldiers in the training camp to attend the speech in the square on time, and anyone who did not go would be expelled from the army. What is interesting is that apart from the soldiers, no officers attended the speech, because not only the soldiers, but all the officers looked down on Steve, who had never been to the battlefield but called himself Captain America. It is conceivable that when Steve, wearing a tights with the American logo, went on stage to give a speech, he was bound to encounter strong resistance from the soldiers. In fact, this is true. You guys are going to come with me to fix Hitler? Steve stood on the podium, facing the silence in the audience, and wanted to warm up the atmosphere by speaking to the hundreds of soldiers below. Okay, are there any volunteers? Nonsense. What are we doing here without volunteers? A soldier in the audience shouted impatiently, and immediately all the soldiers sitting on the square burst into laughter. We want to see the girls dance. Facing the soldiers' noise, Steve responded awkwardly. I think they will only sing one song later, so I'm thinking about what to do with the extra time. Go away. Little fairy, you should dance in boots. The soldiers in the audience did not give him any face and became more and more noisy. Some soldiers began to throw the fruits or water bottles in their hands directly onto the stage. Carter, who was at the back of the stage, clenched his fists, trying to help Steve out, but there was nothing he could do. Please, don't be like this. I was also a training soldier here. Steve had no choice but to use the decorative props in his hand as a shield to block the debris that kept coming from below the stage. What are you doing? A cold and powerful voice suddenly came from the back of the square. All of a sudden, all the soldiers in the square looked behind them in surprise. I saw a young man in an officer's uniform standing behind the soldiers. He had a faint aura of majesty, and his eyes were sharp and cold as he stared at the soldiers. It's Second Lieutenant, sir. The soldier who was about to refute swallowed his saliva in disbelief after noticing the rank insignia on the young man's chest. Such a young second lieutenant? How come I haven't heard of him? He's not older than us, is he? Amid the tense whispers of many soldiers, some seemed to recognize the young man and shouted with complicated expressions. It's Kyle, Lieutenant Kyle. Lieutenant Kyle? Many recruits were slightly stunned, and their eyes turned fanatical when they looked at the young officer again. Hey, is that really him? Nonsense. Who else could be such a young lieutenant besides Kyle? Oh my God! American hero. He is my idol. Of course I joined the army because of his deeds. The soldiers in the square were so excited that they were speechless. Finally, someone took the lead and shouted, "Stand up and salute." Hundreds of soldiers stood up in unison and turned to salute the young man. Hello, sir. Thank you for your hard work, sir. Facing their admiration, Kyle in the back responded coldly. No need to salute. I was just one of you in the first 2 weeks. But is this how you treat my brother? Is this the only quality you have as a soldier? The soldiers looked at each other, gritted their teeth, and quickly turned around again, bowing to Steve on the stage and apologizing. Sorry. Steve on the stage didn't say anything. He looked at the cold-blooded young man standing behind the soldier, feeling really excited and ashamed. He suddenly recalled the sunset scene at the training base after Kyle won the shooting competition. At that time, Kyle said to him, Steve, from now on, no one will dare to look down on us. Chapter 23 Super Soldier Ability. Kyle's arrival instantly made him the focus of the training base. The youngest second lieutenant officer, American hero, these titles are enough to make every recruit talk about it with relish and upgrade it to a hot topic to chat about. And now, the real person in the legend has come here, and he is more attractive than an idle dancer. Steve took the opportunity to get away, retreated to the backstage, and replaced it with a group of dancers in short skirts to go on stage to smooth things over. However, the soldiers in the square were still in high spirits and could not stop looking around, trying to find Kyle, who had disappeared from the field. At this moment, backstage at the speech stage, Steve, Kyle. The two handsome young men ignored the strange looks from the backstage staff and hugged each other with laughter, which was a unique and intimate gesture between the two. Kyle just had a smile on his face, but Steve's face was filled with excitement, and he was as happy as a child. Don't use so much force. The gunshot wound on my left shoulder hasn't healed completely yet. Kyle cursed with a smile, looked at the tall and mighty Steve approaching, punched his strong chest, and said with emotion, I didn't expect that you were much taller than before, even taller than me. He was only 180 centimeters tall, while Steve is now 188 centimeters tall, half a head taller. This is all the effect of the super soldier serum. I am now much stronger than I look. Steve did not hide anything. Sadness appeared on his upright face. He said regretfully, "Unfortunately, the professor was shot and killed by Hydra spies, and the only super soldier serum sample was also stolen and destroyed. Otherwise, it's okay." Kyle shrugged and said nonchalantly, "Even if there is no super soldier serum, I don't care. After all, I still have the backup of drawing cards." Kyle muttered to himself, "By the way, Kyle, what's wrong with your right hand?" Steve's surprised eyes fell on Kyle's right hand. The officer's uniform was a long-sleeved coat, but Kyle's right hand and the palm were now tightly wrapped in white bandages. Kyle lifted up his tightly wrapped vibranium arm guard and made up an excuse. "This is just a minor scratch from the previous battle." "The raid and counterattack campaign." Steve's eyes lit up and he said excitedly, "I've heard about your achievements. You must tell me about the situation at that time." For Steve, a patriotic war maniac who is full of passion and justice, he has never been on a battlefield with real guns and live bullets, which really makes him feel depressed. This was exactly what Kyle wanted, so he readily agreed, "No problem. Let's find a place to have lunch." After saying that, Kyle shifted his gaze to Carter behind Steve. That mature woman who remains as cool and elegant as ever is like a rose with thorns, with an aura that keeps strangers away. Kyle joked, "Agent Carter is here too." "That's great. Let's go have lunch together. I've said I'd repay you for your kindness for a long time." Carter wanted to refuse coldly, but for some reason, he hesitated and said, "Then, go ahead." "You agree? We are brothers reminiscing about the past. Are you really going?" Kyle was a little confused for a moment. He thought that someone as aloof as Carter would definitely refuse. But since it has come to this, we can only let it go and continue. 10 minutes later, in the cafeteria of the training base. At the table in the middle area, Kyle sat on one side, and Steve and Carter sat side by side on the other side. A dinner for 3 people with a weird atmosphere. Brother Kyle, are we going to eat here?" Steve looked at the hodgepodge on his plate hesitantly. It wasn't that he disliked it, he was just thinking about the person next to him. Invite Carter to the soldiers' mess for lunch, which is probably something only Kyle would dare to do. You know, the training base here is near the frontline area of Italian territory. If you want to go to a restaurant, you can only rush there for dinner even if you take a plane. Kyle smiled and said, "Why, didn't you eat there often before?" "I'm fine, but..." Steve glanced at Carter, who was silent beside him. "Oh, by the way, chef, give our beautiful Carter a big chicken drumstick." Kyle shouted directly to the chef in the cafeteria. "Steve." Carter was silent for a long time before he started to eat the hodgepodge lunch on the plate with a spoon. Steve had just taken a few bites when he couldn't help but say, "Kyle, tell me about the counterattack. I heard that due to incorrect intelligence, you had a force of only 100 people facing a large German base." "That's right. At that time, I was a newly promoted corporal, and I led a 100-man force with another sergeant to accept a raid mission." Kyle began to talk about the battle, but his mind was secretly locked on Steve in front of him. In just a moment, only Kyle could see that hundreds of cards of different colors jumped out from the back of Steve's head and quickly floated and rotated beside him. Card driving proficiency, English proficiency, military boxing and fighting proficiency, pistol proficiency, sniper rifle proficiency, true shield strike proficiency. The white and green cards appeared densely in Kyle's field of vision. Compared to 2 weeks ago, when he only had the initial 4 white ability cards, Steve has now been completely transformed. Of course, the original number of cards is not the point. Kale can have as many white and green ability cards as he wants. Kyle's eyes quickly fell on the top of Steve's head, where an incomparable dark blue ability card was floating, and the light it emitted easily crushed the other hundreds of ability cards. Super Soldier, to achieve the perfect physical fitness that is attainable by humans. A rare blue ability card. Qualitative changes caused by human genes. The physical fitness is improved to the theoretical perfect critical value of human beings, which greatly slows down the aging of the body and enhances its immune system, low-level self-healing, and resistance to attack abilities. Possessing a perfect physique with golden ratio, top-notch physical fitness, speed, reaction, and intelligence that normal humans cannot achieve. Current status: extractable. Do you choose to extract? This is a rare blue physical ability card. Kyle felt an irrepressible excitement in his heart. The skill type potential ability card is clearly superior when compared to this type of card. Without any hesitation, Kyle chose to draw directly, but the next moment, an unprecedented warning suddenly sounded in his mind. Warning! This card extraction will take half an hour. Warning! Blue rare quality ability cards can only be drawn once. Warning! Once extracted, the card body will be completely transformed and cannot be replaced. Kyle's face changed, and the 3 warning messages about drawing cards were like engravings with a knife, deeply engraved in his mind. Kyle, what's wrong with you? Steve saw Kyle suddenly stop and asked worriedly. Carter also stared at Kyle in surprise. Nothing. I just suddenly remembered the difficult situation in the battle. Kyle shook his head and continued verbally describing the unfinished battle scene. He didn't think too much, but his mind made a quick decision. Keep extracting. Chapter 24. The poor rely on mutation super soldier ability is a must-have. No matter how big the restrictions are, there is no reason for Kyle to give up drawing. And this restriction only applies to blue rare quality ability cards. Blue ability cards without the rare attribute can still be drawn. However, at the current stage in the Marvel world, there are not that many people holding super green grade ability cards or above for him to draw. It was just half an hour of continuous card drawing time, which made Kyle spend a lot of time and effort to explain the last counterattack campaign in detail to Steve and Carter. Certainly, things like stealth ability cards, Vol Dog creature cards, and gem energy are simply omitted. I sneaked into the arsenal of the large base. Unexpectedly, I ran into the enemy commander in the basement of the warehouse. After killing him, I installed a time bomb in the warehouse. The next step will be easy. We just need to escape from the German soldiers, leave the warehouse, and detonate the bomb. Once the base's internal defense mechanism is compromised, it will be difficult for them to stop the subsequent raid by our 100-man troop. Kyle finished the story as if he was telling a story in order to delay the card drawing time. He drank some water with a dry mouth, and then he realized that Steve and Carter were still immersed in the description of the battle just now. It's really amazing that a single soldier sneaked in and destroyed the defense system of the enemy base by himself. Steve praised with a hint of envy in his eyes. This was the experience he had always dreamed of. You dare to sneak into the base alone? You are risking your life. Carter concluded coldly. I don't know if you have heard this saying. If you don't have passion, your life will be dull and bleak. Kyle smiled confidently, looked at the 2 people in front of him, and said firmly, even if I were given another chance to start over, I would still bet my life on the side that is full of rewards and risks. Instead of being the stars that complement the moon, it is better to choose to spontaneously ignite across the sky of the universe and challenge the sun with its glow and heat. No matter what series you are the protagonist of, no matter what invincible villain you are, if you block my way, I will beat you up. As long as I am here, Marvel has no protagonist. This is Kyle's life creed in this world, and no one can make him give in. Looking at the man in front of her whose faith and aura were so strong, Carter couldn't help but reveal strange emotions in her beautiful eyes. Kyle, you're right. Life should be so exciting and thrilling. Steve quietly clenched his fists, as if he was stimulated by a shot of chicken blood. He was so excited that he wanted to go to the front line and find a base to fight one-on-one. Don't worry, true gold will always shine. Steve, your strength is genuine and you are absolutely qualified to fight alongside me. I am sure of this, Kyle said with a smile. After all, as one of Marvel's representative heroes, Steve with the shield is almost evenly matched with everyone. By the way, Carter, you follow Steve so closely. You two wouldn't. Kyle winked playfully. Carter glanced at him coldly. This is just work to collect follow-up information on the super soldier. That's right, Kyle. Don't talk nonsense. Steve also waved his hand to clarify. You two seem to be a good match. Don't you want to consider it? Kyle continued. Dang. The spoon was thrown on the iron plate. Carter couldn't help but stand up from his seat, said I'm done, and walked towards the cafeteria door and left. Steve sighed and complained. Kyle, you're being too blunt. I'm creating an opportunity for you. Kyle patted his shoulder as if to do him a favor and gestured towards the door. Are you sure you don't want to chase after him? I understand. I'll talk to you this afternoon. After being transformed by the super soldier serum, Steve's brain became much smarter. He nodded quickly and chased in the direction Carter left. After the two left, Kyle finally breathed a sigh of relief. His hands pressed tightly against his chest, sweat pouring out of his forehead. Super Soldier. The draw is complete. This rare blue ability card, as soon as it was stored in the card space, took a dominant position right above all the cards. At the same time, Kyle felt a tingling sensation from the inside out, as if he was being roasted repeatedly on a barbecue. He knew that the Super Soldier's physical ability card had begun to completely transform his genes and physique. I must find a place to complete the genetic transformation of my physique, Kyle said to himself, and quickly thought of a safe and reliable place. Training base, public shower room. Since the performance on the stage had not yet ended, the shower room was empty at this time. Entering a separate single room, Kyle took off his clothes and equipment, turned on the shower, and let the cold water pour down from his head, washing his strong body with various scars. Even so, the tingling and heat in his body became more and more intense. Even his bones were creaking. Something in my body is breaking, tearing apart, and then forcefully reshaping itself. Ouch! Kyle's eyes were filled with bloodshot. He materialized the Nepalese army knife and bit it hard between his teeth as a stress reliever to prevent himself from screaming out in pain. If there are outsiders, you can definitely see that Kyle's naked body is expanding a little bit and then shrinking a little bit, as if adjusting to the most ideal appearance. The blue veins are free and uneven, and the muscles become stronger and more lean after expanding and contracting. The mutation lasted for 3 minutes. Kyle opened his mouth, and the saber fell directly to the ground. There was a row of clear teeth marks on the blade of the fine steel saber. His chest muscles were still beating rapidly, but had calmed down. His skin was emitting heat, and the wounds and scars that had existed on it seemed to have been washed away by water, leaving no trace of the past. Transformation successful. Kyle was clearly aware of this because he could feel that his body was filled with powerful strength that he had never been able to hold before. Although super soldiers are the most perfect physique that humans can achieve, I can no longer be considered a human being, Kyle said to himself. Now, no matter his age, vitality, natural aging of cells, physical strength, learning memory and thinking speed, etc., he is no longer among the top-notch in the definition of human beings. It is not an exaggeration to call it a humanoid monster. Finally, I have a trump card that can help me gain a foothold in this world. Kyle also breathed a sigh of relief, relieving a lot of burden and pressure. Even though he had the ability to draw cards before, he was still just within the definition of a human being, and it was still easy for him to die if he was hit by a bullet in the body. Now, even if you were hit by a bullet, it will only cause minor injuries, not life-threatening serious injuries. Therefore, the super soldier ability is a big step for Kyle to grow in strength. And it is also an indispensable step. After Kyle took a shower and put on his officer's uniform, he noticed that he had grown a little taller, now almost 185 centimeters tall. His physique and abdominal muscles have also become much tougher and stronger, which makes his clothes bulk up and make him look more intimidating. It's true that the poor rely on mutation. Kyle sighed and leisurely left the shower room. Chapter 25 Rescue of Hostages. Kyle came out of the shower room and realized that the weather outside had changed. The sky was covered with dark clouds and a drizzle was falling. The rain had washed away the pits and the aisles of the training base. This place and scene, combined with the current timeline, seems a bit familiar. Kyle was taking shelter from the rain and thinking when he saw a woman holding an umbrella and walking hurriedly towards him in the rain, looking around as if she was looking for someone. After seeing the man's cold and beautiful face, he couldn't help but shout out in surprise, "Carter! Kyle!" Carter saw Kyle standing under the eaves of the shower room, and without caring about the wet ground, he quickly approached him. "Why are you in the men's shower room here, instead of staying with Steve?" Kyle was surprised but seemed to have guessed something, and said jokingly, "You don't really like looking at men's perfect bodies, do you?" After all, the last time he was a soldier at the training base, Carter broke into his dormitory, and Kyle happened to have just come out of the shower at that time. But this time Carter didn't even refute the teasing, and said anxiously, "Kyle, I came to you specially. Please go and persuade Steve. Now you are the only one who can convince him." "Huh? What are you talking about?" Kyle scratched his head in confusion. "I told you on the way. It will be too late if you don't go now." Carter grabbed Kyle's hand quickly and took him into the rain outside, close to the military camp tent area. "You mean in the frontline combat zone in Austria, the soldiers of the 107th Regiment were attacked by the German army, and only a few of them escaped back here. Among those missing soldiers, there was a sergeant named Bucky Barnes?" After hearing Carter's brief message, Kyle immediately understood why she was so anxious. Bucky Barnes, Steve's best friend before he joined the army, and also the Winter Soldier who will be controlled by Hydra in the future. For him, Steve later completely turned against Iron Man and fought with him. Now that he knew Bucky was in trouble and the accident wasn't far away, Steve would definitely risk his life to save him. "So, Carter, are you trying to persuade me to stop Steve from going?" Kyle asked. Carter answered affirmatively. "Of course. Let's not talk about whether the soldiers who were attacked are still alive. There is no large force here to launch a rescue operation. It is too dangerous for him to cross the most dangerous war zone in Europe and go deep into the enemy's rear factory alone." "I understand." Kyle smiled and didn't say much, which made Carter frown slightly and had a bad feeling in his heart. But at this moment, if there is anyone who can stop Steve's persistent actions, it is only Kyle. The two men came to the military camp area and went to the tent specially provided for the propaganda personnel to live in. Steve was still wearing the blue and white striped tights with the American Star logo and had temporarily put on a pair of rainproof Nikes as he was getting on a Jeep military vehicle to prepare a spare tire for rotation. He looked like he was about to set out alone. After Carter came back, Steve was about to say something, but when he saw Kyle behind him, his expression suddenly became unnatural. "Kyle, are you here to persuade me too? I know this is risky, but if I have the ability and don't do it, I will feel guilty for the rest of my life." "You guy, I haven't said anything yet. How do you know I'm here to persuade you?" Kyle shrugged unhappily and helped Steve throw the second spare tire into the back of the car. Steve patted Kyle's shoulder in surprise, and they smiled at each other. Men don't need to say much to each other. They can understand each other's thoughts with just one gesture. Carter looked at him in disbelief. "Wasn't this just making things worse?" "I'll go with him. That should be fine. It's much safer with two of us," Kyle said confidently. Carter looked at Steve, then at Kyle, and said bitterly, "Don't you understand? This is not something that can be done by just one or two people. What will happen when a young man with a clear goal meets another crazy person who claps and encourages him?" In less than half a minute, Carter's obstruction was declared a complete failure. For the sake of the two, he had to secretly use the resources at his disposal. 10 minutes later, a plane took off in the thunderstorm and flew deep into the occupied war zone in Europe in the dark and rain. Inside the airplane cabin, Steve and Kyle sat on one side and Carter sat on the other side, explaining the situation to them. "Hydra camp is in Clausburg between two mountains like a factory. I will let the plane get as close to the gate as possible. Stark is the best pilot I have ever seen. Only he dares to take off in this thunderstorm." As Carter said this, a gentleman-dressed man in his 30s, sitting in the cockpit of the plane, waved his hand casually. "Howard Stark? The founder of Stark Industries and the father of Iron Man." Kyle's eyes lit up slightly. He really had wanted to meet this legendary figure from the Marvel world for a long time. He greeted her. "Is this Howard from the Science Strategy Bureau? I've seen your scientific inventions at museum exhibitions. They are all works of genius." "Lieutenant Kyle," Howard responded politely, "I've heard of you a long time ago. You rejected the Super Soldier Project experiment, the title of a single soldier war maniac, and the title of an American hero. If there is a chance, I can treat you to cheese fondue when we return. Of course, it would be even better if Agent Carter also goes with you." "It's settled then," Kyle said with a smile, not caring about the upcoming danger, as if he was sure that he could return safely. With some cards in hand, he really wanted to have a good relationship with Howard. "Attention! We have entered enemy-occupied territory." Howard gave a rare, serious reminder and quickly operated the instruments to avoid the gunfire, causing the plane to shake violently. Through the window, One can clearly see lightning flashing in the sky above, and enemy gun muzzle flashes constantly appearing in the dark wilderness below. The natural and man-made attacks are seriously affecting the flight of the aircraft. It's too dangerous. Steve, and I will go down from here. You guys should return immediately. Kyle made a decisive move and opened the plane cabin. The night wind from 100 meters above suddenly rushed in, opening the windbreaker he was wearing. We're pretty close to the enemy factory here. Steve nodded, stood up, and stood at the hatch side by side with Kyle. Steve, Carter called him and said slowly, please come back alive. Don't worry. Steve comforted and jumped down first. Steve will be fine as long as I'm here. I'll treat you to a real meal when I come back. Kyle waved his hand and jumped down following Steve. In just a few seconds, the two of them fell rapidly and disappeared in the night rain. Not just Steve, please come back too, Kyle. Watching the two people leave, Carter on the plane whispered to himself. No one knew what he was thinking about. Chapter 26. Exposability in the wilderness of night. Violent storms, thunder and lightning, and flying bullets. Kyle was face down, falling at an accelerating rate, and the night wind blew his windbreaker in the face. This time he chose to come to the rescue team with Steve, firstly to test his transformed strength through actual combat. Secondly, there are a lot of battle merits to earn and a lot of loot to collect, so there is no reason not to come. Steve, who was not far below, opened his parachute. Kyle also estimated the timing and opened the parachute device behind him. The two of them floated and fell into the wilderness. Da-da-da! They had only descended to a height of 20 meters when the enemy soldiers below seemed to have discovered their tracks and fired continuously into the sky. I'll go and draw their fire, Steve shouted, as if he was afraid that the bullets would hit Kyle, and he immediately controlled the parachute to draw the fire and rush down first. I still need you to take the bullet there. Kyle shook his head and smiled, then pulled out the Nepali army knife from his waist with his left hand, swung it backwards, and actually cut the parachute rope on his back. This was still more than 10 meters above the ground in the wilderness. Without the buoyancy of the parachute, Kyle fell rapidly again. Seeing this scene, not only Steve, but also several German soldiers below were stunned. Does that person want to commit suicide? Just as this thought came to the German soldier's mind, Kyle fell from a height of more than 10 meters, rolled on the muddy ground, and stood up again lightly. My legs are a little numb, but now I can really do it, things that ordinary people can't do. A smile appeared on Kyle's cold face. Without any test or experiment, he just felt that he could do it, so he took a risk and gave it a try. Today, this physical fitness that exceeds human standards is like a treasure house meeting a key, or a sports car meeting a highway, for the hundreds of combat skill cards. The cooperation between them has brought about unimaginable qualitative changes. What are you waiting for? Shoot me. Several German soldiers were still staring at Kyle in a daze. After the leader shouted a reminder, they hurriedly raised their guns and aimed and fired. But Kyle's reaction was faster. Instead of retreating, he advanced, rushing towards the German soldier's guns with a saber in his left hand. Tread! Kyle suddenly took a step forward to the left, and a bunch of bullets grazed his right shoulder and hit the mud. When the German soldiers turned their guns to the left in panic, he quickly moved to the right. The left and right movements were just to avoid the bullets. The important thing was his top-notch speed. A sprinter's moving speed is about 10 seconds for 100 meters, but Kyle's 100-meter sprint only takes 3 or 4 seconds. When calculated, the distance between us and the enemy was only 20 to 30 meters, which was only a breath's time. Pust! Without even giving the second wave of bullets a chance to fire, Kyle approached the enemy soldier, raised his knife, and slashed. A bright blade flashed past with a sound. The leader's eyes were still filled with fear. A section of the rifle barrel in his hand broke and fell to the ground. Soon, a flat blood mark appeared on his neck, and his head rolled off his body. Monster! The soldier behind the leader yelled in fear and was about to run away, but Kyle took a step forward, stretched out his right hand, grabbed the back of his neck, and lifted him up with one hand. Let him go! Another soldier shouted in panic, pointing his gun at Kyle nearby. However, before he could shoot, a figure suddenly jumped down from above his head and stepped on him. You're really slow. Kyle chuckled, swung the soldier in his hand 360 degrees, and pressed his face into the mud. Kyle, your speed and strength, what's going on? Steve stepped on the struggling German soldier and looked at him in shock. Kyle's face was calm. He had never thought of hiding his super soldier ability from Steve. After all, if he wanted to exert his corresponding strength, he would have to explain it to the army sooner or later. I didn't tell you because I only mastered this power not long ago. Kyle sighed and explained to Steve seriously. Remember the counterattack 10 days ago? In the warehouse of the enemy's large base, I searched a tube of reagent from the commander. I wanted to take it back to the base for scientific research, but unfortunately the tube broke when I was escaping, and the reagent liquid flowed into my wound. Steve had no doubt about Kyle and asked anxiously, "Is the reagent liquid light blue?" Kyle nodded and said, "That's right." The reagent liquid integrated with the blood, and I passed out from the pain. When I woke up in the hospital, my body seemed to have undergone an unprecedented mutation, and my strength and speed were beyond that of an ordinary person. Kyle, congratulations. It seems that you have obtained the original serum of the super soldier and successfully integrated it with your body. Steve said happily. Super soldier serum? Kyle looked confused. Yes. The doctor was originally from the German scientific department and later escaped from the research institute. I heard that someone in the upper echelons of the German army also used the super soldier serum. I didn't expect that one was left behind, and you were lucky to have got it. Steve sighed. He was really happy for Kyle. After all, it was Kyle who gave him the opportunity to conduct the super soldier experiment, and he has always felt guilty about it. Kyle knew in his heart that the origin of the ability he had woven was a bit rough, but based on Steve's 100% trust in him, it was a lie that he could easily justify. After Steve believed it, he went back and told the military, and the fact that Kyle had a super soldier was basically settled. I was worried about you at first, but now you are also a super soldier, and you have more combat experience than me. The probability of us sneaking into the enemy factory and rescuing the soldiers has greatly increased, Steve said excitedly. In that case, let me command the infiltration operation. Kyle nodded confidently and said to Steve meaningfully, "Well, first, let me teach you a simple lesson on the battlefield." Before he could finish his words, Kyle raised his left foot and stepped forward, completely pressing the struggling soldier's head that Steve was stepping on into the mud. The soldier's limbs danced and struggled even more frantically, and mud splashed everywhere. However, under the suppression of absolute power, he soon suffocated to death in the earth. On the battlefield, don't show any mercy to the enemy, just kill them with one strike. Killing is not necessarily justice, but killing the enemy is military justice. Kyle said coldly, his aura dropping to freezing point. I see. Steve nodded hesitantly. No matter how strong his physique is, he is just a rookie who has never been to the battlefield. He needs to be trained. Oh no, he should be taught a lesson. Then follow me and head towards the main entrance of the factory. If you can avoid the patrolling enemy forces, avoid them. If you can't avoid them, don't give them a chance to communicate and kill them directly at close range. After Kyle finished speaking, he headed towards the factory he had just seen on the plane, and Steve followed closely behind him. The two of them quickly disappeared in the night rain again. Chapter 27. Sneaking into the factory outside the main gate of the German factory-like fortress. Under the rain, a convoy of 6 large German supply trucks slowly drove across the mud, and the destination of the transportation was obviously the garrison fortress. 2 figures quickly passed through the jungle on the side, and under the cover of night, they crept towards the back compartment of the last supply truck. Kyle was the first to climb into the back compartment of the car, which was only covered by a leather sheet. When he saw 2 fully armed German soldiers sitting inside, he whispered, "One for each of us." He quickly rushed towards one of the soldiers, covered his mouth with his right hand, and at the same time, with his left hand, he thrust half of the Nepalese machete into the soldier's heart. His comrade was killed in front of him, and the other soldier finally realized the enemy attack and was about to take out his gun when a young man behind Kyle also pounced on him. The steel shield used as Captain America's decoration hit the soldier's forehead first, and Steve followed up with a sharp knife, breaking the unconscious soldier's cervical vertebrae. The movements are pretty good, but a little too slow. Kyle, who was sitting nearby watching the show, nodded and gave a fair evaluation in a slow and orderly manner. "You were too fast," Steve said with a wry smile while dragging the soldier's body. "If you want to fight alongside me, you have to learn to keep up with my pace." Kyle shrugged as a matter of course and threw the bodies of the soldiers he had killed out of the car, and Steve followed suit. Killing people and dumping bodies is a simple and crude way of infiltration. Since the German factory here was located in the rear of the combat zone, and there were countless trucks transporting supplies coming in and out every day, the soldiers at the main gate did not check the rear cargo holds of each vehicle one by one. The transport convoy did not expect that their own vehicle would carry 2 enemy super soldiers into the fortress. After the transport trucks had come to a complete stop and were shut down, Kyle and Steve came out from the back of the trucks and hid between the stacked bunkers. This time, the infiltration was effortless and much simpler than the last large base they raided. The drizzle had completely stopped at this time. Under the dim light of the night, a large factory building was located in the fortress, and soldiers were constantly carrying boxes of supplies into it. Many soldiers armed with blue light special effect guns were patrolling and wandering around. There were also high-end weapons such as tanks in the fortress, all guarding the factory. It doesn't look like a base for soldiers to camp. Instead, it looks like a manufacturing factory, Kyle said to himself. He looked around and saw the 20-meter-high factory building. The sound of machinery operating could be heard faintly in the middle. They are building factories and working here day and night. What exactly do they want to make? Steve asked puzzledly. What to make? Kyle suddenly had an idea. He glanced at Steve and said seriously, "Steve, let's split up." Steve looked at Kyle in surprise. "Separate our forces? Shouldn't it be safer to act together in this place?" "What's the point of safety? The key is to quickly find the hostages. If we are discovered by the enemy, we can get out safely with our strength, but the hostages may not be found," Kyle explained. "The factory is so big, we should split up and search for them. Once we find them, we should rescue the hostages first." "That makes sense. You better be careful then." Steve nodded in agreement and impatiently avoided the soldiers guarding the factory. Watching Steve's back, Kyle showed a triumphant smile on his face. "I'm sorry, brother. You have to attract the attention of the enemy in the factory first. This can be considered as a weight-bearing exercise for you. After all, there is no better way to learn than to fight in person. Manufacturing factory. At this point in time, is there any better energy source for the German army than the residual energy of gems?" Kyle licked his lips, and his body outline gradually faded in the darkness, and soon he completely disappeared from the spot. Stealth activated, Nightcrawler mode. From a close distance, Kyle seemed like a misty shadow that did not exist in the world, following Steve silently. Inside the fortress's factory building, the machinery and equipment inside are more technological than those outside, and German workers are constantly operating the equipment inside. Steve lurked along the way. He was extremely cautious, and without Kyle's guidance, he was more relaxed. Baji. After crushing a patrol soldier's head with the door, Steve completely entered the factory, with a cloud of fog following him at a distance of 10 meters. "Your skills are pretty good, but the shield is a bit of an eyesore." Kyle couldn't help but complain. It would have been fine if Steve had just sneaked in, but he had to carry a steel shield with the American stripes and stars painted on the surface, as if he was afraid that people didn't know that he was an American soldier. Captain America, as a vanguard, is destined to be a shield soldier. Kyle shook his head and continued to follow. Steve walked up to the 3rd floor of the factory. Below the suspended railway were metal piping equipment, and rows of blue glowing shelves of supplies were stacked in the aisle on the 3rd floor. Energy magazine? He picked up a magazine with a blue light from the box in surprise. He didn't have time to think too much and continued to look for where the hostages were held. As soon as Steve left, Kyle, who was sneaking around, stopped beside the supply shelf. Looking at the rows of blue light magazines filling the shelves, he couldn't help but get excited. "How much gem energy do I have? How many times can I draw cards?" Kyle was secretly delighted, but as soon as he turned his attention to the supplies, the excitement on his face instantly disappeared. New energy magazine. A new energy magazine, made by extracting the residual energy of gems, which can fire laser beams with amazing destructive power. Rare green item card. Do you choose to extract? Take your head. Kyle was speechless. He had thought that these energy magazines were all of blue quality, but he had not expected that they were only of rare green quality. Rare green item cards are provided for sacrifice and drawn as materials, and are also counted as green cards. This is also the reason why Kyle is not interested. He can only use the energy magazines in front of him in actual combat. It is better to exchange the materials sacrificed for card drawing for ordinary green supplies on the battlefield. Forget it. Let's go rescue people with Steve. Kyle was a little helpless. He just stood up and took a step, but soon he seemed to remember something and stopped. Etc. For such a large new energy manufacturing plant, what are the main materials used? That's right. I only focused on these junk materials, but here is one of the most precious items in the entire Earth and even the universe. Kyle's heart was shocked, and he clenched his fists excitedly. Tesseract. Here is the Tesseract, the carrier of the space gem. Tread. Kyle quickly went into stealth, not caring whether he was exposed or not, and headed for the factory's hub control center as quickly as possible. Chapter 28 Red Skull. Don't run away if you have the guts inside the fortress factory at this time. Warning! Warning! The prisoners held in the factory basement have escaped. All soldiers, please go and suppress them immediately. The red warning lights on the walls lit up, and the communication broadcast sharp and rapid reports back and forth. The guards inside and outside the factory responded quickly and took action. It seems that Steve has released the captive soldiers. Kyle was still sneaking in the factory corridor. After hearing the warning broadcast, he immediately knew that Steve had successfully rescued them. Time is passing faster than expected. I can't care about that much anymore. Seeing a group of German soldiers appearing on the aisle ahead, Kyle immediately exited stealth mode and pedaled with all his strength to speed up. He held the saber in his left hand and clenched his right hand into a fist, then rushed forward at a rapid speed. Enemy attack! The German soldier at the front of the team shouted in panic and pulled the trigger of his gun forward. Suddenly, a dazzling blue-white laser burst out from the muzzle. The corridor was originally a straight, narrow passage, so it was easy to hit the target without aiming. In addition, the speed of the laser was several times faster than that of a bullet, so even a super soldier would not be able to dodge it. Kyle's pupils contracted. The laser beams continued to expand in his field of vision, and the hairs on his body stood up as a warning. He did not try to dodge or defend, but rushed forward with suicidal acceleration. At the moment when the laser was about to fall on his chest, he swung his right hand forward quickly in advance. Laugh! The energy laser that could directly evaporate a human body was actually bounced back by Kyle's right arm. The German soldier in front of the team didn't have time to react before the laser beam shot from his gun bounced back onto his body. However, in just the blink of an eye, his entire body, along with his helmet and combat suit, were evaporated into water vapor. Just bounce the laser back. Is this a monster? The German soldiers showed a terrified expression as if they had seen a ghost. The new energy weapon has been a high-risk thermal weapon that can kill people instantly since its production. This is the first time that it has been seen to be ineffective and bounced back by someone's hand. Whoever stands in my way, die. Kyle didn't care whether the enemy had lost their will to fight. For him now, it was not a matter of whether the enemy would continue to fight back, or flee, or just stay still like they were now. No real impact at all. Like a cheetah diving into a herd of rabbits, Kyle rushed into the enemy ranks and began to reap lives. The small Nepalese machete was like the sickle of the goddess of death, and every swing and stab took the life of a soldier. With strength far beyond that of an ordinary person and a sharp saber, the enemy's combat uniform and human body were as fragile as paper, and the scarlet blood splattered, dyeing the corridor red. "Get out of my way!" Kyle whispered coldly, and he elbowed the last soldier away. The bandage and sleeve on his right hand had completely evaporated due to the laser beam, revealing a vibranium arm guard with a cold metallic texture. Vibranium, also known as sound-absorbing steel. Not only is it one of the hardest materials in the Marvel Universe, it can also absorb heat, energy, and kinetic energy. Thanks to the vibranium arm guard, the laser had lost its offensive power when it landed on Kyle's right hand, and it bounced back due to the swing. After forcefully defeating a group of German soldiers, Kyle wasted no time and sprinted towards the factory's hub control room. He did not notice that the scene of killing the enemy troops just now was clearly transmitted to the other end of the device by the camera at the corner of the top of the wall. At this time, the factory's hub control room. The Red Skull, who looked like a middle-aged military officer, stared at the dozen surveillance screens in front of him, and a hint of fear appeared on his fake face. Two super soldiers invading a factory? The reason he said this was because on one of the surveillance screens in the underground area of the factory, Steve, wearing a blue and white striped tights, was quickly knocking down two soldiers. On the other screen, Kyle just rushed into the German team, leaving behind 7 tragic corpses and continuing to approach this side. The first one is fine, but why is the second one so strong? Red Skull couldn't believe it. He asked himself if he could treat the German army armed with new energy weapons as nothing like Kyle did. With a super physique brought to the extreme, superior close combat skills, and decisive killing, it is simply a war machine. They are both super soldiers, so why is there such a huge gap in their strength? Although the super soldier he injected was only an initial incomplete sample, with the horrific flaw of being disfigured into a Red Skull face, its strength should not be that much worse. The Red Skull didn't think much about it, and calmly turned on all the self-destruct switches in the factory. The old doctor behind him asked in shock, "What are you doing?" Red Skull pointed indifferently at a surveillance screen, where Kyle could be seen quickly passing through the camera. "He can't be stopped. Not to mention the soldiers here. Even I may not be able to stop him." "Retreat immediately," said the Red Skull, and quickly walked to the wall of the hub room. After opening the secret compartment, a square Rubik's Cube object emitting blue light appeared. Tesseract. Not to mention this factory. Even 10 factories would not be even 1/10,000th of the object in front of us. It should be just ahead. Kyle sped up and turned around the wall. What appeared in his field of vision was a straight corridor, and in the middle of the corridor was the hub room. It happened that at this moment, at the door of the hub control room, a German officer carrying a bag and an old doctor came out, and the two were about to leave. "Want to run? Leave the Tesseract behind." Kyle snorted coldly and rushed over quickly. "Stop him." The Red Skull had no intention of fighting. He glared at the doctor fiercely and evacuated to the end of the corridor with the bag. Damn it. The old doctor's face turned pale with fright. Knowing that he was abandoned, his legs went limp and he sat down in front of the door. "I told you, don't even think about running away." Kyle pursued him ruthlessly. He was sure that the bag in the other officer's hand most likely contained the Tesseract. What a waste. The Red Skull glanced back at the old doctor, but he had no intention of relying on an old man to hold back the decisive super soldier. "Try this." At some point, Red Skull had a new energy block in his hand and threw it towards Kyle with force. Residual energy from gems? Kyle looked at the energy block thrown to him in surprise. This thing was the raw material for making energy magazines, which was also the blue quality item drawn from the large base last time. This thing has a stable energy state and can be used directly as a weapon? Kyle's doubts were answered in the next moment. The Red Skull took out a pistol, aimed at the energy block that was still in the air, and pulled the trigger. "This BD is FG crazy." Kyle roared, quickened his pace, grabbed the old doctor on the floor of the corridor, and used him as a meat shield in front of him. At the same time, bullets are shot at the energy blocks. The next moment, even the air froze and stagnated. Bang! The explosion of the energy cube was like a tidal wave, sweeping around inch by inch, destroying everything in its path. Chapter 29. Return of Victory. The dazzling blue energy tide spread and covered everything, and no matter if it was walls, floors, or steel doors, they were all destroyed into nothingness without a single blow. Ah! The screams of the bespectacled old doctor seemed insignificant, and his body gradually turned into nothingness until it evaporated completely. The walls of the corridor shattered and collapsed, and the dust continued to form a shock wave that blew Kyle away. After a few seconds, everything began to calm down. At the end of the corridor, the Red Skull tore off the mask on his face, revealing a scarlet and terrifying skull face. He looked indifferently at the damaged corridor in front of him that had suffered a devastating blow, and after coldly saying, "See you later, super soldier," he turned around and left without looking back. After another half a moment, A disheveled figure stood up from the pile of rubble in the corridor. It was Kyle, who had escaped the disaster. Ahem. Kyle shook off the dust on his body and looked at the torn human skin hood on the ground at the end of the corridor. His tone was extremely cold. Red Skull, next time? I promise that next time, if I run into you again, you will die a very ugly death. I'll remember this grudge in a little notebook first. Fortunately, the meat shield in front blocked most of the energy waves, and with the blocking of the vibranium arm guards, Kyle only had the sleeves of his hands burned, and his clothes were damaged from top to bottom. However, we still lost the best chance to seize the Tesseract. Kyle sighed secretly. He really suffered a loss this time. He underestimated the villain Red Skull. After all, he is the founder of the Hydra organization. Even if his strength is slightly inferior to Steve and not as good as himself, his insidious tactics are still hard to guard against. At this moment, an alarm suddenly sounded in the hub control room, where only half of the space was left intact. Kyle came to his senses and rushed in as if he had realized something. Black smoke was seen coming out of the control console in the hub control room, and the main screen showed a message in red German. Countdown to factory self-destruction, 61 seconds, and the number of seconds was still decreasing. Opposite the screen in the control room, an unconscious young man was tied to a laboratory table with his upper body naked. On the side wall, there was a large map with 6 flags scattered on it. Kyle's attention was focused on the map, and immediately a card drawing message popped into his mind. German military factory distribution map. It records the distribution map of 6 German weapons manufacturing factories and bases. White item card. Extraction? Another map. This is to unlock the level. Kyle blinked, and a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. Red Skull, you can run away as much as you want, but I will destroy your nest one by one first. Kyle had just extracted the distribution map on the wall into a card when suddenly a tall figure rushed into the room. The two looked at each other and were slightly stunned. Kyle, Steve. After a long journey, Kyle and Steve met again in the factory control room. What happened here? Steve looked around the dilapidated control room in confusion. It's simple. The commander of this factory got impatient and threw an energy bomb to stop me. Kyle shrugged and pointed his chin at the young man lying in the room. That's the person you want to save this time. It's Bucky. Steve was overjoyed when he saw the young man and hurried over to wake him up. Just carry it away with your shoulders. This place is about to explode. Kyle said, pointing to the main screen. There was only half a minute left in the countdown. Steve nodded and did as he was told, carrying his unconscious friend on his shoulders. Kyle was about to lead the way to escape, but out of the corner of his eye he saw something on the console table. Car key. The key to Red Skull's exclusive car. A 4-wheel drive vehicle built with top German craftsmanship and boasting amazing horsepower. White item card. Got it, come with me? Kyle grabbed the car keys and took Steve to the factory garage. The half-minute countdown ended. Explosions occurred simultaneously in various parts of the factory, and new energy materials triggered a series of bombings. The flames illuminated the wilderness at night. Outside the factory, a large number of American prisoners were liberated. After looting the factory's new energy weapons and tanks, they had already defeated the German troops stationed there. Seeing the factory spontaneously explode, all the American soldiers fled. At that moment, with the accompaniment of a burst of fire and the roar of an engine, a stylish and exquisite luxury car that looked like a work of art suddenly rushed out. Follow my instructions and break out in the direction of our base. Kyle shouted from the driver's seat, stepped on the accelerator to the bottom, and led the charge, smashing the factory's iron net directly, as if he was driving Red Skull's precious vehicle like a tank. Follow me. Everyone follow me. When the American soldiers saw Steve and Bucky in the car, who were wearing conspicuous clothes, and realized that they were their own people, they immediately jumped for joy and followed the car, rushing into the endless wilderness in the dark night. One night passed. In the early morning, when the sky was just getting light, Carter could not wait to go to the communication office of the training base to inquire about the news. Captain Kyle and Steve Rogers disappeared in the third post-war area last night. The factory there has lost all signs of life. The search team has returned and is now preparing to officially report them as dead. Commander Brandt received the telegram in person and said to Carter coldly, Because of you, we not only lost an excellent officer and a propaganda leader, but also the lives of hundreds of soldiers. If this is the result, I am willing to take full responsibility." Carter responded calmly. She didn't believe that the two men would die so easily on the battlefield. "No matter what you say now." Brant paused halfway through his words and turned his gaze to the side and behind him. It was the sound of a car running, faintly coming from the wilderness outside the base. "Look, what is that? Oh my God!" The soldiers who were preparing for training in the base gathered around the back door of the base in surprise, and soon separated to make way for the empty space. There was a damaged luxury car leading the way. Kyle was sitting in the driver's seat and driving slowly, while Steve and Bucky, who had just woken up, were sitting in the back seat with their arms around each other's shoulders. Behind the luxury car were hundreds of American soldiers armed with new energy weapons. Although they had been fighting all night and their faces were full of fatigue, they took every step with great determination. "They are back. This kid is really..." When Commander Brant saw the enemy tanks being driven back behind the team, he was completely speechless. "Is this the looting of the enemy's factory? Please give me a chance to show my talent as a soldier." The young man's firm words are still echoing in my ears. I don't know when. The new recruit who had just entered the base has quickly become a hero who has created miracles time and time again. "It's really amazing." Commander Brant took up the unfinished words and led the applause, and the soldiers in the training base followed suit. The thunderous applause could not be calm for a long time above the base. Chapter 30 History of Stark Industries. Kyle and Steve's battle to rescue the prisoners ended in complete victory. On that day, Kyle handed over the battle report and intelligence map to Chief Brant for submission. He did not even personally confirm his military achievements. After cleaning and changing into a formal shirt with Steve, he immediately went to meet up with Howard Carter and others. After all, before rescuing the hostages, Howard had promised to treat them to cheese hot pot, and he couldn't just do that casually. Howard is a wealthy local tycoon. You can't be polite to him. So at Kyle's strong suggestion, several people boarded Stark's plane that day and flew to the nearest city to attend the banquet and have dinner. Howard is not only rich, but also very gentlemanly and romantic. The place he invited the three people to was naturally not an ordinary restaurant. The hotel's entrance is decorated with luxurious golden lights that dazzle the eyes. The ground is covered with a clean red carpet. The security guards are dressed in gentlemen's suits, and the receptionists are all beautiful ladies in short skirts. "Howard, you really know how to live your life," Kyle commented. Howard kept smiling without commenting and led the three of them into the hotel. Howard was obviously a frequent visitor here. The customer service receptionist didn't even confirm his identity. When he saw him coming, he came forward and flirted with him, offering all kinds of VIP services. The dining hall on the first floor is much more low-key and luxurious than the outside. Under the gentle light of classical lamps, musicians play violins and guests dine elegantly to the music. Most of the people here are either rich or noble, and they don't have the slightest worry or annoyance about the war in the outside world. However, when Howard was about to ask the front desk staff to find a four-seater, Kyle spoke first and asked the customer service staff to find two two-seaters each. Howard smiled when he heard this. "Two people? Captain Kyle, you understand me. Let me and beautiful Carter have dinner together tonight." "You think too much." Kyle rolled his eyes and looked at Carter beside Steve. Tonight, she was finally no longer dressed in the military suit that she had been wearing for years. Carter wore a strapless long dress that matched the occasion, and with a little makeup on her already beautiful face, she looked even more beautiful. Her perfectly fitting red dress also highlighted the curves of her mature figure that had been hidden before. "I promised you that I would bring Steve back safely. I didn't break my promise," Kyle said to Carter, and without waiting for her response, he patted Steve's shoulder again. "Take Carter to dinner first." "Ah!" Steve exclaimed in surprise at first, then nodded quickly. "Oh, I see. I'm creating an opportunity for you. So, seize it, brother." Kyle laughed secretly. He didn't have any feelings towards Carter, so it didn't matter whether it was a pity or not. What's more, the purpose of tonight is not as simple as having a sumptuous dinner. "Please follow me." The receptionist bowed warmly, gestured towards the dining area, and took Steve and Carter to their seats first. Carter just left like that. Howard's face was full of disappointment. He glanced at Kyle and said hesitantly, "Are we two grown men going to have a meal? Or a meal for two? It's up to you whether you want to have dinner or not. To be honest, I have something else I want to discuss with you tonight." Kyle shrugged. "Something else?" Howard looked at Kyle puzzledly. Kyle said meaningfully, "Let's find a place to sit down and talk about the details first." The basement level of the hotel building. The style here is different from the lobby on the first floor. Under the dim lights, gentlemen and women of all identities let themselves go and dance to their heart's content to the music. The receptionist holding the wine glass was dressed even more revealingly in a bunny-made outfit with scant fabric. Her white tube top and long legs were very attractive. Howard took Kyle to sit at the bar, and during the process, he openly pinched the buttocks of a few bunny girls passing by, being both romantic and gentlemanly. The Stark family are all playboys. Kyle secretly complained and ordered a vodka from the waiter, while Howard ordered a cocktail. "Well, let's have a toast to World War II." Howard raised his glass elegantly and said something unexpected. Kyle looked at him in surprise and asked, "Is there something to be happy about when a war breaks out?" "Of course. For someone like me who studies scientific strategies, lethal weapons, and super technology, it would be difficult for me to do my job without war." Howard kept smiling and looked at Kyle. "You too. If there was no war, you would not be able to be promoted from a recruit to a second lieutenant in just a few weeks. I have to say, you have a strong sense of interests." Kyle laughed and raised his glass to clink with his. War has its pros and cons. For those who have the ability, it is an unprecedented opportunity. For those who do not have the ability, it is an abominable disaster. Howard took a sip of wine and said, "Don't keep me in suspense. If you have anything you want to discuss with me, just tell me. Otherwise, I'll have to go chat up some pretty girls." Kyle nodded and got straight to the point. "Okay, I'll get this straight. I want shares in Stark Industries. You want to be my industrial partner?" Howard was a little surprised, tapping the table with his fingers. "Can you tell me the reason?" Kyle drank and said firmly, "It's very simple. I believe in the inherent potential of Stark Industries. In the future, it will definitely be the top strategic and scientific manufacturer on the planet. Most importantly, I believe in you. You are an absolute top genius. I have to say, you have good vision." Howard heard a satisfactory answer. He was an extremely talented person and had enough capital to be proud of himself. "Due to the war, my current work focus is still on the country's scientific and technological strategic research. Although the Stark Industries I founded has not made much progress yet, it has achieved results in the anti-gravity project and will involve more scientific fields in the future. If the war is over, the Stark Industries will develop rapidly." Howard said this, looked at Kyle seriously, and said, "I'm not looking down on you. I've read your file. You don't have much assets under your name, and the salary of an officer, even at the colonel level, is not that high. How do you want to invest in Stark Industries? Even if they were friends, Stark Industries shares would not be given away for free with eyes closed." Kyle naturally understood this. He dared to discuss shares directly with a proud genius like Howard, and of course he came with enough trump cards. "What I invest in is not money, but the future." As he spoke, he placed a rectangular, slightly thin machine that he had prepared in his trouser pocket on the bar. The front of the machine is almost a whole tempered glass screen with a tiny camera on it. The back of the phone is a smooth metal shell with a prominent notch in the middle housing the Apple logo. That's right, a cell phone. An iPhone. Chapter 31, Happy Cooperation. What kind of machine is this? It looks like it has excellent manufacturing technology. After all, he's the most outstanding manufacturing expert among scientists. As soon as Howard saw the exquisite metal shell of the iPhone, he felt that this item was not simple. He picked up the phone, weighed it, and began to fiddle with it. "I call it cell phone. Kyle smiled faintly and began to explain like a salesman. "Don't be fooled by its small size. It is actually a device with hundreds of functions. It has fingerprint unlocking, face unlocking, simple voice control, photo and video recording, storage and decompression, information transmission, time alarm, calculation and recording, game music, call service, search engine, and other functions. How can such a small machine have such advanced and practical functions?" Howard was surprised and checked it carefully. Kyle laughed secretly. and he almost couldn't help laughing out loud when he saw the smartest and most advanced manufacturing genius on Earth marveling at a mobile phone. This mobile phone is just a green quality item card, one of the common items drawn from the previous sacrifice card draw. Kyle originally thought that since it was World War II and telephone signal towers and the internet were not yet widely built, there was really no use for the cell phone he won. It wasn't until he met Howard on the plane last time that an idea suddenly popped into Kyle's mind. Cell phones are indeed useless to him now, but for Howard, a genius scientific manufacturer, it is completely different. Anyway, this mobile phone is indeed very popular in the 21st century, but in 1943, it is an advanced technology product that has spanned more than half a century. Howard operated the phone. His eyes became brighter as he looked at the lit screen, his fingers quickly performing various commands. This surprised Kyle, who was standing next to him. He didn't even explain the basic operation of the phone to Howard, but Howard, with his keen sense of technological products, quickly began to master the operation of the phone the first time he used it. As expected of a man who can give birth to the man who will create artificial intelligence and iron armor in the future, I have the passive card of technology adaptation. Kyle allowed Howard to try out the phone. Most of the apps on the phone had been deleted long ago, and the time records had also been changed. But even if Howard discovered some secrets from it, he didn't care. This trial lasted for a full 10 minutes. Kyle took his fourth glass of wine, and Howard turned off his phone. He touched his chin in deep thought, and then looked at Kyle seriously. Colorful high-resolution screen, precise touch control, and various practical soft functions that are not available now. This machine, called a mobile phone, comes from a planet with a technological level far superior to ours. Or the future world. As for its origin, I'm sorry I can't tell you too much, but I can guarantee a few points. Facing Howard's doubts, Kyle smiled, raised 3 fingers and said, "First, its origin is absolutely safe. 2, there is no second mobile phone in the world now. 3, it brings you only benefits and no disadvantages. As long as the advanced technology and techniques of this machine are fully understood, Stark Industries will have sufficient capital to advance into the top technology manufacturing industry earlier after the end of World War II." I understand. Howard fell into thought again. Kyle was not in a hurry. He looked at the gentlemen and ladies dancing in front of him and continued to taste the unique flavor of the wine from the old times in the glass. "Sir, may I have the honor of dancing with you?" During this time, many girls and ladies approached Kyle to chat up with him. After all, he looked young and handsome, and his perfect and strong body, paired with a formal shirt, made him look very charming. "Sorry, I have something to do with my friends." Kelvin and the gentleman's refusal left many girls disappointed, but some still mustered up the courage to leave their business cards. After a long while, Howard asked tentatively, "How many shares of Stark Industries do you want to invest in this mobile phone?" Giving such a sentence means that we can continue the conversation. Kyle also secretly breathed a sigh of relief, but he was obviously not as calm as he looked. Although he was very confident about the phone, this was the Marvel world after all. Nowadays, there were new energy weapons, anti-gravity devices, laser tanks, self-driving fighter jets, and so on. There were countless black technologies, and he had no idea whether he could impress Howard. "I want 40%, Kyle began. 40. Howard was just about to finish his first glass of wine when he choked and coughed repeatedly, saying, You're asking an exorbitant price. Since this is a cooperation, I will of course invest more than just this phone." Kyle's face was calm, and he threw out the second trump card hidden in his hand. "The phone I brought here today is just a bargaining chip for the first cooperation negotiation. I have something that is not worse than this. Can you tell me briefly what that item does?" Howard became interested again. The surprise Kyle gave him tonight was big enough. "I can only say that it's an introduction to the field of artificial intelligence." Just as Kyle finished speaking, Howard was shocked all over, and he dropped his glass on the bar, spilling the drink all over the table. In an age when even computers are still under development and research, and the systems are only in their infancy, what does artificial intelligence represent? Represents the future. If what you said is true, then what you are investing in is really the future. Howard was shaking with excitement. Kyle smiled and asked, "I wonder if 40% of Stark Industries shares is too high a price under these circumstances?" "Not high. Absolutely not high. Even if you want 50%, I will give it to you. Howard's previous hesitation was gone. He had no reason to refuse. Howard likes money, fame, power, and beauty. But when compared with invention, they are nothing. 40 is enough for me. You are still the best founder and the first shareholder, Kyle said with a smile. Only when Stark Industries is completely under Howard's control can it develop rapidly into a top industry according to the timeline. His investment is a very profitable one, just like raising a goose that will continue to lay golden eggs, so he doesn't have to worry about money in the future. Then it's settled. You invest your phone and another item in exchange for 40% of Stark Industries shares. Howard laughed and happily asked the bartender at the front desk for another glass of wine. He raised the glass high and said, "I wish you a pleasant cooperation. It's a pleasure working with you." Kyle raised his glass in response. The two clinked their glasses again, then raised their heads and drank it all in one gulp. Nobody knows. The largest share transaction in the history of Stark Industries, a future top enterprise, was agreed upon at the bar counter of this underground dance party. Chapter 32 Arming and Team Building. Kyle estimated that Carter and the others would soon finish their dinner, so he and Howard left the dance hall bar on the basement floor. "Kyle, after discussing such a big deal tonight, you should treat us," Howard said to Kyle teasingly. After this brief discussion, the two of them have now established a preliminary partnership and have become much closer and more familiar with each other. "Sure." Kyle took over the words with a smile and blinked. "But you also know that I am still very poor now, and the officer's salary has not been paid yet. I wonder if the big boss can advance me the next month's dividend from Stark Industries." "You really are." Howard shook his head speechlessly, feeling like he had dug a hole and ended up burying himself. But he still took out a golden exquisite card and a check with a voucher from his wallet and handed it over. "This card is a permanent VIP card for the charming hotel here. There is a deposit of $20,000 in it. You can use it first. In addition, here is a check for $100,000. You can go to the central bank of major cities to withdraw cash, but it is best to make an appointment in advance, otherwise they will not be able to take out so much money. You should know that the average salary of an ordinary American soldier is only $60 a month. The $120,000 thrown out casually is a real huge sum of money." Kyle took it without being polite and said jokingly, "I didn't expect the bonus for a month to be so high." "Thank you, boss." Howard urged, "No need to thank me. Just send me the second investment item as soon as possible. I will ask my lawyer to prepare the share transfer agreement for you, and you will be a partner of Stark Industries after you sign it." "No problem." Kyle nodded. The second item was also stuck on his body, but it was inconvenient to take it out in front of others. "So what is the second item to invest in?" "In fact, it is the system program chip of the supercomputer." It was a green item card that Kyle had drawn that was even more useless than a cell phone, a unit of scattered parts. But if you want to develop and enter the field of artificial intelligence, it is definitely the best stepping stone to get started. As soon as Kyle and Howard returned to the main lobby on the first floor of the hotel, they saw Carter walking towards them in a hurry. "Have you finished dinner? Where are Steve and the others?" Kyle asked in surprise. Unexpectedly, Carter glared at him and asked, "Where did you two go?" "I asked Steve to look for you, but he couldn't find you." "Well," before Kyle could answer, Howard laughed and said, "Don't ask. Men naturally have their own places to go for entertainment and consumption. Your answer is easy to make people think wrongly." "Okay," Kyle secretly complained, but Carter didn't think too much about it and said seriously, "Just now, General Chester sent me a command message and asked me to pass it on to you guys. Let's go back to the training base first. I haven't even had a chance to relax yet, and I have to go back to work." Howard slapped his forehead helplessly. "It's about that intelligence map." Kyle showed a thoughtful expression. He had long thought that after reporting the intelligence map, the higher-ups would definitely give instructions and take action, but he didn't expect that the decision would be made so quickly. "Kyle!" Steve's voice came from behind, returning at this moment. "Everyone is here. Let's pay the bill and leave." Kyle smiled and casually handed the VIP card in his pocket to the hotel staff. "The consumption of the four of us tonight will be paid from here. Having money makes me feel more confident." "Kyle, I didn't expect you to be so rich." Steve was surprised. He knew without even looking that the cost of the hotel here was not something that most people could afford. Carter was even more surprised. She had also seen Kyle's personal file. So where did this hotel VIP card come from? What on earth did these two people do just now? Carter looked at Kyle and Howard suspiciously, unable to figure out what was going on. The plane went out to a big city for dinner that day and returned to the training base on the same day. On the plane, Carter carefully explained General Chester's command mission to the three people. Kyle and Steve, you two will be the team leaders. Select soldiers from the training base to form an armed team and launch attacks on the 6 German factory bases in the war zone one by one. As long as the factory bases that provide weapons and supplies are destroyed, Germany will no longer pose a threat to Europe. Steve, from now on you are a corporal, Carter said. His eyes fell on Kyle. As for you, your military merits will continue to accumulate, but there will be no promotion this time. It doesn't matter. Kyle nodded. His lieutenant certificate wasn't even warm yet. He was accustomed to and liked the rhythm of accumulating military merit and then being promoted rapidly. Carter continued seriously. Stark, you provide scientific strategic weapons for 2 super soldiers. Oh. Howard, who was flying the plane, responded casually, and soon seemed to realize something and turned around in surprise. 2 super soldiers? Yes, Kyle has also become a super soldier. Steve replied that he had reported this information specifically after returning from the war. Carter stared at Kyle and said seriously, Next, I will be responsible for supervising and recording you and collecting information about the super soldiers. Okay, Kyle replied weakly, muttering in a low voice. I am at least a 2nd lieutenant. How can I not save face if I am supervised by a woman like you? Wouldn't it be better to have Steve as your guinea pig for research? Carter pretended not to hear and remained cool and elegant. Steve immediately suggested, if we need to form an armed team, we can just gather the soldiers we rescued last night. They have been fighting on the front lines for a long time and have experience in using new energy weapons to fight the German army. No problem. As prisoners, they must have been holding back a lot of anger that they haven't fully let out last night. But on this basis, I will also transfer a talented person from the 102nd Regiment, Kyle said thoughtfully. Who? Carter asked. She still had the right to transfer only one person from the front line. His name is Nick Fury, and he's a very smart and capable sergeant, Kyle said with a smile. This was an opportunity to quickly gain military merit, and he was taking good care of Fury. HU. In a makeshift tent on the front battlefield, a one-eyed black non-commissioned officer sneezed. He touched his bald head in surprise, a little confused. It's not cold here. Why do I have a bad feeling? Fury muttered to himself. Even though there was no major battle on the front line, he felt a chill down his spine. Chapter 33. Adamantium Shield. A day passed. Steve recruited the soldiers he had rescued before and quickly formed a troop of considerable size. This is also due to his personal charm, strong sense of justice, and friendly ability that makes him seem like he was born to be a captain. At noon, a helicopter landed at the training base. Fury got off the plane, carrying a military package. He looked around in confusion, not knowing why he was transferred here alone from the front line. The frontline commander only informed him that there was an important dispatch order, and then asked him to hastily pack his bags and get on the helicopter as soon as possible. Fury, how are you? A familiar voice suddenly came from behind. Fury turned around and opened his mouth wide when he saw the person coming. Kyle? Call me sir. Kyle deliberately frowned and pointed to the military rank on his chest suggestively. Yes, Lieutenant Kyle. You are not the one who transferred me here this time, are you? Fury said unhappily. He knew on the front line that Kyle was promoted to 2nd lieutenant, so he was not too surprised at this moment. What do you think? Apart from me, who else would deliberately use military authority to transfer you? Kyle shrugged. Tell me, what are you transferring me here for? It's not to cooperate with you on the battlefield. Fury's voice was a little trembling. Although he won the military merit of being promoted to sergeant for his last cooperation with Kyle, thinking back on that battle, it was still too crazy. Kyle is not the kind of person who follows conventional tactics. If he can fight head-on, he will never back down. If he can't fight head-on, he will try another way. It's not an exaggeration to say that he is a warmongerer. It's not the front line. Kyle comforted him. Fury was just about to breathe a sigh of relief, but Kyle's next words almost made him suffocate. It is to enter the enemy's rear area and attack the German factory bases, a total of 6 locations. You're dragging me down with this. Fury was so depressed that he wanted to vomit blood. I am deliberately taking care of you so that your command ability can be demonstrated in advance. Kyle showed a devilish smile. There is no reason for such a talent as the future director of S.H.I.E.L.D. to be wasted in a stalemate on the front battlefield. The underground level of the base. The walls of the corridors were dimly lit and divided into many research departments and basements. Many correspondents, researchers, and officers were analyzing the battle situation in the frontline theater here. Kyle led Fury deeper into the room. As soon as he stepped into the door of the science strategy department, someone in the room seemed to notice him, and a figure with a blue background walked towards him quickly. Kyle, you came just in time. What do you think of my new combat uniform? That man was Steve, who stopped in front of the door and asked Kyle's opinion. Well, Kyle's eyes fell on Steve. This time he was wearing a tight leather jacket that was much better in quality and fashion than before. But with the usual blue base color, there was still a conspicuous silver 5-star on the chest, and a dark blue hood covering half of his face. How to say it? This outfit is eye-catching, but the question is, are they really going to war? Kyle secretly complained that the enemy knew without even thinking that the person dressed so ostentatiously was the leader. So who else would you focus on? However, Kyle's comments were completely different. Very good. This just fits your title as Captain America. Leading the team like a captain can give the soldiers great courage and faith. Really? That's great. Steve nodded in satisfaction, and then noticed Fury behind Kyle. Who is this? Kyle introduced. Let me introduce Nick Fury, a commanding talent that I specially asked Carter to transfer from the front line. Hello, my name is Steve Rogers, one of the leaders of this team. Steve stretched out his hand and shook hands with Fury, the future director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the symbol of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s predecessor. The two completed their historic meeting in the basement ahead of schedule with the help of Kyle. Kyle, I knew you were satisfied with the Captain America combat suit I made. The material of the suit is not ordinary leather, but high-fiber material. It is not easy to damage, dust-resistant and heat-resistant, and has a certain bulletproof ability. Howard came out of the laboratory and gave a science lecture. Then, as if to surprise Kyle, he said, I'm going to make a set for you too. The materials have just been airlifted in. Ah, that's not necessary, right? Kyle forced a smile. Wearing the same combat uniform as Captain America to go to the battlefield? That would be extremely embarrassing. Howard said seriously, this is necessary. I promise to provide you 2 super soldiers with scientific strategic armament assistance. This is my job in the military. After Kyle's repeated resistance failed, he finally agreed reluctantly. You can make the combat uniform, but the general style needs to be modified according to my requirements. That's no problem. Howard nodded in agreement and waved to the others. Come, I'll show you something. Howard took them into the laboratory, picked up an item from an air freight box, and placed it in front of everyone. Kyle opened his eyes first and saw a smooth, disc-shaped shield with a metallic texture. At the same time, the card message of S.H.I.E.L.D. appeared in front of him. Adamantium shield. Made of raw adamantium metal, the specific components are vibranium, iron, and certain chemicals. Almost indestructible, able to resist extreme pressure, extreme temperature, radiation, electromagnetic spectrum, etc. Prevent the spread of kinetic energy and have perfect aerodynamic characteristics. The force angle can be controlled so that it returns to the original point after being thrown. Blue rare item card. This shield is made of materials that were accidentally synthesized. Since the synthesis process and the ratio of various components are unknown, this kind of metal can no longer be produced again. It can be said to be a unique equipment in the world. After Howard finished his introduction, he looked at Kyle and Steve. The shield has only one side, so who should I give it to? Both of them are super soldiers. If it were in the past, he would give it to Steve, who became a super soldier first. But now, both publicly and privately, Kyle is obviously the best candidate to use this shield. Kyle. Before Howard could finish his words, Kyle took the shield. He tapped the hard surface of the shield with his fingers and said with emotion, "It's really a very good piece of equipment. Steve, just take it and use it." Kyle casually stuffed the shield into Steve's arms. which surprised everyone on the field. Kyle, this. Steve held the shield in both hands, a little overwhelmed, and wanted to refuse. All right. Kyle patted Steve's shoulder hard, interrupting him. What do you have to share with me? Take this shield, and don't hold me back on the battlefield in the future. Yes, I understand. Steve didn't act pretentiously. He clenched the shield in his hand with emotion, his eyes full of determination and firmness. Very good, that's it. Kyle smiled slightly. He had vibranium arm guards as defensive equipment. Although the shield was good, it was not suitable for his combat concept of attack as defense. Besides, how can Steve fight the villains on equal terms without a shield? This is what Captain America should be like, wearing the most conspicuous combat uniform, holding the hardest shield, rushing to the front, and taking the hardest beating. Chapter 34, Carbon Sodium Steel Sword. Okay, since Kyle has said so, Steve will use this shield. Howard thought for a moment and said, in fact, there is another piece of equipment. Although it is not as effective as this shield, its killing ability is many times higher. Don't keep us in suspense. Take out any equipment you have, Kyle urged. Wait a moment, Howard said, opening another air transport box and taking out an object similar to a long sword from it. The hilt of the sword is just big enough to be grasped by hand, and the rest is covered by a leather scabbard. This is. Kyle's eyes fell on the object, and a blue card message quickly appeared. Carbon Sodium Steel Sword, a high-tech long sword made of carbana alloy. Blue item card. Carbana is a kind of radioactive metal. Although its hardness is lower than that of adamantium, it has very good ductility, so the blade is extremely thin. The sword is tough and sharp, and can inhibit the body's healing factors and cause permanent trauma. There is no rare prefix, but the blue quality proves the excellence of the equipment. A long sword made of carbon sodium steel? Kyle reached out to take the long sword, gripped the cold hilt, and pulled the sword out of the leather sheath. Suddenly, a cold light lit up in the basement. This is a one-handed sword. The guard is elongated to form a cross with the blade. The sharpness of the blade is forged to the extreme. No one dares to question whether it can cut through iron like mud. Howard explained, the carbon alloy material of this sword was obtained from the Russians, and it is only enough to make this small one-handed sword. The style is designed by me according to the medieval style. I hope you like it. I like it very much. Kyle nodded directly, with an unconcealable satisfaction on his face. With the vibranium arm guard as a defensive equipment, what he needs most now is an offensive weapon. In the fierce battle with the German army with new energy weapons, the Nepalese saber can no longer keep up with the intensity of the battle. This carbon sodium steel sword can just replace the saber, whose blade has many wear and tear marks. Okay then, one of you holds a shield, and the other holds a sword. As the team leader and top fighter, you will be more confident in attacking and destroying the German factory base. Howard seemed to remember something and said to Kyle, let me know your requirements for combat uniforms later, and I can make them tonight. This way, both of you will be fully armed. Kyle nodded. In fact, it was just a modification based on Captain America's combat uniform. If the basic color, pattern style, and hood configuration of the clothes were removed, he could still barely accept it. Steve said, we have almost assembled our team, no more, no less than 500 people. With the German army's new energy weapons as the main force and conventional weapons as the supplement, we can also arm ourselves into a sophisticated offensive force. It seems that as long as the intelligence personnel in the base finish their analysis and the orders from above are implemented, we can start the action tomorrow. Kyle's mouth curled up slightly, and a cold look appeared in his eyes. Red Skull, I want to see how long you can hide. Fury saw Kyle's cold face and subconsciously took a half step back. For the first time, he felt pity for the German army. After all, they were being targeted by a god of death. Another day passed. That morning, the colonel at the training base finally obtained the official attack order after an hour-long discussion with the general. The top leader is Lieutenant Kyle, and Captain Steve, the team leader. The two will lead a 500-man force into the enemy's war zone, first crossing 30 miles and attacking the first factory base as the target. The attack order is White Star Plan. In the afternoon, in the basement of the base, Carter walked quickly through the passage, looking left and right as if searching for someone, and finally trotted directly towards the laboratory. As soon as she opened the door of the laboratory, a powerful explosion with a faint blue light occurred inside. Two people in scientific research uniforms were knocked away by the air wave and fell to the ground in a mess. "Stark, are you okay?" Carter called out, looking at Howard and his assistant sitting on the ground in surprise. "Nothing. Just researching the German army's new energy source." Howard got up from the ground and asked in confusion, "Why are you here? Aren't Kyle and Steve about to leave?" "I was just about to ask you that." Carter looked at the empty laboratory and frowned. "I thought they were preparing here." Howard shook his head and said, "No. Kyle came over last night to take away the combat uniforms. I haven't seen the two of them since then. They may be integrating the team in the square. These two people are really worrying." Carter stamped his feet and quickly rushed to the square of the base. When Carter arrived at the main square of the training base, he found that it was already crowded with soldiers. They all stood on tiptoe excitedly, wanting to get in to get a better view. At this moment, a stern voice came from the innermost part of the crowd of soldiers. "Listen to my orders. Everyone sit down." Swish! Thousands of American soldiers immediately sat down quietly, making the lively scene in the square quiet in an instant. At the outermost edge of the crowd, only Carter, who had just arrived, was still standing there in a daze. Follow her gaze and look forward. 500 armed forces, ready to set off, were seen surrounding the inner area of the central area, while the rest of the soldiers from the training base were surrounding the outer area at the back. In the circular area with a radius of 5 meters, two tall and strong young men stood facing each other. One was wearing a blue and white combat uniform, with a silver star pattern on his chest that symbolized American justice, a dark blue face-covering hood, and a colorful metal round shield on his back. The other one was wearing the same combat uniform, with a black and gold base. The logo on his chest was a rotating cross that symbolized death. He was not wearing a hood, revealing his handsome face as sharp as a knife. He carried a one-handed sword with a leather sheath on his back. "Steve, Kyle, what are you doing?" Carter looked at the two men, surrounded by many soldiers in the square, still confused. In the central area, Kyle stared at Steve and said coldly, "Steve, are we really going to fight? The scheduled departure time is coming soon." "Yes. Just treat it as a warm-up exercise in advance," Steve said firmly, clenching his fists and getting into a ready position for close combat. "I won't show mercy." Kyle narrowed his eyes. Although he didn't know why Steve suddenly asked for a fight before leaving, he had no reason to back down. Steve said firmly, "Please use all your strength." "Very good." Kyle smiled faintly and also did not use the weapon behind him. Instead, he clenched his fists and assumed a similar close combat posture. "I heard that you were 50-50 with everyone. Well, I will give you another good lesson today." Chapter 35. Captain America's passive 50 on the square. More than 1,000 American soldiers sat in the central area to watch. Kyle and Steve were facing each other in silence one moment, and the next moment, both of them rushed towards each other with explosive stomping. From the perspective of a third party, it only took the blink of an eye for them to engage in a fierce close combat. "Be careful." As if realizing that he couldn't let Kyle get the first chance to attack, Steve took the initiative to apply pressure first. As he approached the attacking range, he pulled back his left hand, which had been charged with strength, and lashed at Kyle's face like a whip. "Brother, don't hit people in the face." Kyle held back his complaints and reacted very quickly, raising his right arm, which was not wearing the vibranium arm guard, to block the attack. Bang! When the attack failed, Steve bent his left leg back and pulled it up, angled his knee, and pushed forward. This is to not give the opponent any chance to relax, and to crush the opponent with high-intensity offensive pressure in one go. Kyle raised his left foot, as if he had expected it, and kicked Steve's leg, causing the knee that was about to hit his stomach to stop narrowly. "Huh." Steve frowned. He didn't expect that he would suffer a loss so soon due to the experience gap. He gritted his teeth, and instead of retreating, he advanced, continuing to attack with his fists and feet, engaging in close combat with Kyle. Bang, bang, bang. Although both sides were only fighting with fists and feet, a loud and powerful explosion sounded in the air. Should I say he is indeed a super soldier? So strong. They can beat ordinary people to death with one punch, right? Ahem. Can the guys at the back please step back a bit? I'm a bit panicked right now. The soldiers in the crowd were stunned. The soldiers sitting in the innermost circle swallowed their saliva and subconsciously moved their buttocks back, fearing that the fight between the two men would affect them. Kyle blocked the punch once again. Although he did it with ease, he was just defending and gradually became a little breathless under the pressure of the crazy attack. This made Steve secretly happy, and he felt that his insistence on attacking was a good bet. But when they passed each other, he suddenly saw a smile on Kyle's cold face. He was actually laughing. Steve's forehead was covered with sweat, but at this time the two were fighting in close combat, and it was impossible to stop the attack. He could only bite the bullet and go all the way to the end. Did you finally realize it? Kyle kept smiling. Steve understood him very well and knew that his offensive skills were much stronger than his defensive skills. So from the beginning, I tried my best to intensify my offensive, not wanting him to take the initiative to attack. What a pity! Don't you understand that you are giving up your natural defensive advantage? Kyle shook his head slightly, and the defensive posture of his hands and feet suddenly changed, and he forcefully turned himself into the offensive party. Counterattack fight, endurance fight, military boxing, and fighting, grappling techniques. More than a dozen offensive fighting moves can be switched smoothly to fight to the end. Steve's face changed drastically. Kyle's fighting skills changed too quickly. He wanted to switch from offense to defense, but was hit by a series of punches and kicks, and he had no strength to fight back or defend. Let me teach you what an attack is. Kyle smiled coldly, pinning Steve down tightly, punching him hard with a slight force, leaving him no room to resist. Steve smiled bitterly and was in a passive position. He could only protect his face with his hands and was beaten like a punching bag. What on earth happened? Lieutenant Kyle was being suppressed at first, but in the blink of an eye, he had Captain Steve hanging and beating him. I don't understand either. The American soldiers watching were in an uproar, looking at the dramatic scene in the central area with complicated expressions. You little bastards, I taught you not to study fighting skills hard. A voice came from outside the crowd of soldiers. Some soldiers looked back and saw that Chief Joseph, who was dressed in an officer's uniform, had become a member of the audience at some point. Joseph said as he watched the two men fighting, Steve's fighting skills are far inferior to Kyle's. If Steve has 5 fighting skills, then Kyle has more than 15. At this point, Joseph laughed and exclaimed, This kid is really a monster among monsters. In the center area, Kyle threw a straight punch with all his strength, hitting Steve's abdomen cleanly and neatly, knocking him away. Steve groaned in pain, and the shield on his back fell to the ground and slid along the ground, stopping only when he sank into the crowd of surrounding soldiers. Give up, Steve. There is still a clear gap between you and me. If you were the enemy, you would be dead within 50 rounds. Kyle breathed coldly, staring directly at Steve, who was lying on the ground. If we only talk about their physique, there is actually no difference between the two. But even if the extremely brutal and lethal means cannot be used, Kyle's strength still crushes Steve. Just like what Joseph said, the fighting skills of the two are too far apart. Kyle knows the same fighting skills that Steve does, but Steve may not know the same fighting skills that Kyle does. This is, of course, not Steve's fault. Even if he has the ability to learn quickly, he still needs to put in a lot of energy to learn and master it, as well as practice in actual combat. But Kyle is different. There is no need to study or not. He can just read the card and draw it. This is a bit like the helplessness of privileged members in online games when they encounter cheating players. Not yet. Steve struggled to get up from the ground, spitting out a mouthful of blood foam, and said resolutely, I haven't given up yet. I can still fight like this for another day. Whatever. Kyle shrugged and was about to continue attacking, but Steve's next move made him look a little surprised. It was Steve who put the adamantium shield on his left hand. That's right, otherwise it would be too boring, Kyle said with a smile, and suddenly accelerated and dived forward. Steve didn't attack rashly this time. He looked at Kyle, who was rushing towards him, raised his shield calmly, and suddenly swung his left hand forward vigorously, and the shield flew out of his hand. He actually used the shield as a long-range throwing weapon. Kyle's pupil shrank slightly, and he looked at the shield that was rushing towards him, and quickly raised his right fist to collide with it. The shield did block it, but with a whooshing sound, the shield turned back to the original direction of throwing like a boomerang. This shield is bad. Kyle realized something and wanted to step back. But it was too late. Steve had already leaped in front of him, caught the flying shield with his left hand, and knocked it down from top to bottom. Kyle could only use his elbow to hit the shield in a hurry. As soon as his elbow hit the shield, the force of the elbow was absorbed immediately. At the same time, Steve's shield continued to fall down forcefully, instantly pressing Kyle's body down, forcing him to kneel on one knee for support, and even creating obvious dents in the compacted mud. The first time Kyle faced the characteristics of the adamantine shield, he suffered a great loss. The vibranium component of this shield obviously completely absorbs the power. As long as the attack lands on the shield, it will be forced to miss. Chapter 36. Shield and Sword Clash. How about this? Steve held the round shield with both hands and used his own body weight to try to crush Kyle. Not bad. Kyle responded with difficulty. His left shoulder pressed against the shield, one knee and right palm pressed into the mud. Steve tried to pin him to the ground with his shield, and Kyle tried to push the shield away and stand up to fight back. The game of fighting between the two of them completely turned into a tug-of-war of pure power at this moment. "Kyle, just give up," Steve said solemnly, and began to put all his strength into pressing down with both hands, lowering the shield little by little. After all, he has the upper hand, and in terms of sheer strength, Steve believes he is not inferior to Kyle. It's not that simple. Kyle gritted his teeth and insisted, maintaining the shield-holding posture without any wavering. The lowering of the shield, in fact, it was just the collapse of the mud on which it was located. Although he was wearing a tight black combat uniform, one could still see that the muscles all over his body were visibly bulging, and his right palm, which was supporting the ground, had been clenched into a fist at some point. The golden sunlight shone on Kyle's steel-like body, and at this moment, he was like a bronze sculpture representing strength. Amid the exclamations of a group of American soldiers and Steve's incredulous gaze, the shield pressing down on Kyle quickly rose up inch by inch. "If you want me to give in, this is far from enough." Kyle pushed Steve's shield away and stepped back a few steps, breathing heavily with exhaustion. "But now, your strength is almost exhausted." Steve's eyes were filled with complicated meanings. Kyle actually tried his best to push the shield away regardless of everything. This did win back a glimmer of hope, but it also pushed himself into a desperate situation. Steve continued, "Your attack has no effect on this shield." "Steve, you must have forgotten." Kyle suddenly smiled and said, "I haven't even used my weapon yet, and you think you've won?" As he spoke, Kyle reached back, grasped the hilt with his left hand, and pulled out the carbon-sodium steel sword. Compared to the adamantium shield, which has colorful and eye-catching graffiti patterns on its surface, the carbon-sodium steel sword is simply a one-handed sword. Its mirror-smooth blade gives people a suffocating sense of sharpness. Although close combat is not bad, it is still too troublesome to rely on fighting to kill the enemy on the battlefield. Kyle said coldly, holding the one-handed sword tightly in his left hand. He still holds the green ability card for sword skills. But what is more important is not just the sword fighting skills, but the sharpness of the carbon-sodium steel sword, which can increase Kyle's attack power by several levels. Even if the weapons in his hands were carbon-sodium steel claws or carbon-sodium steel knives, they would not be much worse. As long as he has a sharp enough cold weapon, Kyle can kill with one strike. At this time, the soldiers were at the outermost part of the crowd. Joseph looked at the two armed men in the central area and suddenly walked quickly to Carter's side. "Agent Carter, those two guys are really playing now. If we don't stop them, there may be an accident." Carter shook her head slightly, without moving her beautiful eyes away from the field, and said, "Are you serious now? Can't you see that they have been seriously trying to defeat each other all along?" Joseph asked in confusion. "What's going on?" Their fight was also very sudden. "Isn't it time for the White Star plan to depart soon?" "I'm just guessing." Carter's eyes showed complex meanings. "Steve, he has been holding back a lot of energy for a long time and wants to vent it. That's because no matter what he does, Kyle can always be one step ahead of him and lead him forward." The Super Soldier Experiment qualification and the adamantium shield were all indirectly given to him by Kyle. Despite this, Steve still felt that he was far behind Kyle. He even feels insecure about his title of Captain America, and he may be questioning himself in his heart. Why can he only cower under Kyle's protection when he has better opportunities and weapons? He also wants to go ahead of Kyle and hold up a shield for him. So, this time, as the captain, he is about to go to the enemy area to lead the soldiers to fight. Before that, Steve wants to find himself and his confidence in the battle with Kyle. As Carter finished speaking, the fierce battle in the central area was coming to an end. The fierce collision between sword and shield produced no sparks due to the cancellation of kinetic energy. Only the crisp sound of iron hitting the target echoed clearly in the square. After the sword strike and shield defense were canceled out, the two men brushed past each other and still used their fists to inflict physical damage on each other. Kyle and Steve flew backwards, rolled on the ground for a few rounds, and quickly got up, fighting head-on again. The two are each other's best friends in the world, but they are also competitors, each with their own pride and indomitable spirit. Everyone wants to be at the forefront and have more stage and focus in the era of winning. Under the sun, on the square, Kyle and Steve, one holding a sword and the other holding a shield, finally rushed towards each other with a roar. This shocking scene was frozen in the eyes and minds of more than 1,000 American soldiers at the base and is still as clear as yesterday half a century later. Even half a century later, this scene will be made into a physical sculpture by a sculptor with the highest artistic attainments and placed in front of the war memorial. Bang! The carbon-sodium steel sword flew high, spun countless times in the air, and then stabbed into the mud not far behind Steve. Steve was still swinging his shield, while Kyle flew backwards heavily, leaving a noticeable mark on the ground, and finally lay on the ground exhausted and motionless. Captain Steve, the soldiers were about to cheer for the winner, but at this moment, Steve raised his hand exhaustedly. I lost. A bloodstain clearly appeared on the side of his neck. It looked like just a minor wound, but it kept bleeding. I'm really tired. Kyle struggled to get up and brushed off the dust on his body. The final and decisive blow was not caused by his sword slipping out of his hand, but rather by him throwing the sword as a concealed weapon after being hit by a shield. If he hadn't held back, Steve would have been beheaded by now. Kyle, you've used all your strength. Steve covered his wound and gasped, looking at Kyle with bright eyes, wanting to get an answer. Kyle was slightly stunned, then nodded and said, "That's right." Although stealth and vibranium arm guards were not yet used, Steve was already the toughest and most powerful opponent he had ever encountered. Really? Steve nodded with satisfaction, clenched his fists firmly, and said, "I'll let you go first this time, but one day, I will definitely go ahead of you. Otherwise, I will let you down. Then I'll wait and see." Kyle smiled faintly, looked around at the soldiers around him, took a deep breath, and said in a cold voice, "Are you ready? Follow us to the battlefield and annihilate the enemy." Ready! A huge shout of response resounded throughout the entire base, and 500 American soldiers stood up and looked enthusiastically at the two people gathered in the innermost area. "Then take your weapons and follow us." Steve gave the order loudly, and the 500 soldiers who had gathered immediately took hold of the guns they had equipped long ago and collectively made way for them. After this battle, both of them were covered in wounds, but their prestige was several times greater than before the fight, and the morale of the troops was unprecedentedly high. What are you waiting for? Let's go. At the command from Kyle and Steve, the two of them rushed forward and led the team out of the base. Looking at this scene, Joseph exclaimed, "These two people may be able to change the situation of the war." Wrong. Carter watched the team leave and said confidently, "It will definitely work." Chapter 37. Fame nationwide more than a month later. New York, Brooklyn, Highland Street. As winter approaches, the pedestrian streets gradually become prosperous under the morning sun. Christmas has just passed, and the new year is about to come. Despite being at war during World War II, this major economic city of New York was not affected by the smoke of war at all. In the early morning of winter, people wrapped in coats hurriedly walked on the streets, busy with work and livelihood. From time to time, you can see some hooded children holding a stack of black and white newspapers, walking quickly through the busy streets and shouting. The latest New York Times. Major Kyle and Lieutenant Steve led their troops to destroy the German fortress base once again. Wall Street Journal. Two American heroes fought brilliantly again, and the German front retreated 20 miles due to lack of resources. The iron-blooded officer who won every battle and turned the tide of the war will tell you today about the glorious path of Major Kyle, who was a 10,000-man enemy. During this period of time, newspapers were basically the first to print and publish battle reports from the front lines, not to mention reports of victory in battle. Once they are released, they will be snapped up by the public. Look, the newspaper boy with a red face from the frost sold 2 stacks of newspapers in just half an hour on the street where the cold wind was howling. It turns out that even if World War II did not appear to affect New York, it was enough to make people worry about the American troops on the front line, hoping and praying that they could end the war as soon as possible. Can you give me one? A blonde girl wearing a purple scarf smiled and waved gently to the newspaper boy running on the street. The boy immediately trotted over, took the change, and put the last newspaper in his hand into the girl's basket. He opened his eyes wide, looking at the girl's delicate face that looked like an angel, and couldn't help but praise her. "Big sister, you are so beautiful. You're quite sweet." The blonde girl's beautiful eyes curved into a smile, and her warm smile seemed to melt the snow around her, which made countless gentlemen passing by on the street bump into the street lights frequently. "It's time to go home." Lucy breathed in the cold air, elegantly carried the food and newspapers in the basket, and started walking back home. It's called a home, but in fact it's just the house where Kyle used to live. Located at number 199 Highland Street, it is a classic European and American-style duplex villa with a balcony garden. Lucy took off her boots and walked in. There was a heater in the house, and the temperature was much warmer than outside. So she took off her cotton coat, revealing her graceful figure that could not be concealed by the sweater underneath. After placing the basket on the table, Lucy changed her elegant and dignified demeanor outside, and with excitement on her face, she quickly took out several newspapers from the basket and spread them out on the table. Newspapers all have headlines and picture sections, and the protagonists in the pictures on the headlines of these newspapers are very different. They are either a stern young man holding a round shield and raising his arm to command, or a cold-blooded young man dressed in black and holding a long sword and rushing towards the enemy. Below the pictures in the newspaper, there are detailed profile notes of the characters. Steve Rogers, 23 years old, Captain America, lieutenant officer. Captain Steve's first battle in life was to go deep into the third enemy-behind area with Major Kyle, destroy the factory base, rescue 500 American soldiers trapped in the cage, and break out successfully. He called himself Captain America, always rushing to the front with a shield, leading a team of soldiers to capture 5 German factory bases within a month and minimize the casualties of his own personnel. He is a patriot, a super soldier, and the embodiment of American justice. Lucy quickly glanced at Steve's profile, and her beautiful eyes quickly fell on the other side, which was longer and more cumbersome. Kyle Dove, 23 years old, the youngest major officer in history. Seeing this, Lucy smiled sweetly with satisfaction, opened her lips slightly, and read aloud Kyle's next personal biography. Major Kyle is the youngest major in American history. He was the first to infiltrate the enemy base in a counterattack operation with a 1-to-1 ratio and annihilated the German commander and the main force, thus successfully winning the opportunity to turn the tide of the battle on the front line. So far, all the battles led by Major Kyle have ended in complete victory, often with him defeating an entire group of enemies alone. According to incomplete statistics, the number of enemies killed by him has exceeded 10,000, making him a true enemy of 10,000 people. He is a hero who represents the symbol of American power. He is a warmongerer that the German army fears, nicknamed Devil, and Decide. The latest news is that the President of the United States has awarded the Medal of Honor to Major Kyle. After reading it smoothly in one breath, Lucy's face turned redder with joy. Although such reports praising Kyle were frequently published in newspapers during this period, she would buy such newspapers every time and read them day after day. A few months ago, he was just a rookie who broke into an enemy base, but he has become a major so quickly. He is also a hero representing American power. Huh. Lucy pouted her pink lips. She was under a lot of pressure right now. Not only in New York City, but all the young women in the United States were obsessed with the cold-blooded young man in the newspaper. After all, movie theaters in some big cities would occasionally show combat documentary promotional videos from the battlefield. Kyle and Steve have been like the protagonists in a war documentary over the past few months. The perfect posture of bravely killing the enemy and charging into battle, the strong personal strength of fighting against many enemies alone, and the young and handsome face are all revealed. On the projection screen, just waving their arms to direct or looking towards the camera is enough to trigger wild screams from some teenage girls. Anyway, I knew Kyle first. Little Lucy, you have to cheer up. There's no reason for you to lose to those women. Lucy cheered herself up secretly, curled up on the sofa, a bit like a woman waiting for her husband to return, and finally muttered sadly, "The new year is coming soon. I don't know when Kyle will be able to come back." At this time, hundreds of miles away from New York, in the glacial mountains behind enemy lines. Below, a rugged railway track stretched from the waist of the snow-capped mountain to the distance. Everywhere there were snow-capped peaks, biting cold winds, and drifting snowflakes. On the top of one of the snowy mountains, a team of dozens of American soldiers wrapped in military coats were lurking, listening to intelligence messages from the rear base through monitoring equipment. Fury said confidently, "It has been confirmed that on the train that is about to pass, there is an important figure from the Hydra organization, a newly appointed middle-aged German scientist, Warner Tours. Okay, let's get on the train. This time we're just going to get the prisoners, so we don't need to go with so many people," Kyle said quickly, looking at Steve beside him. Steve nodded. "Just me, you, and Bucky. The three of us are good at one-on-one combat, and we're not afraid of any number of guards on the train." Okay, Kyle nodded in agreement. In fact, he was going alone and was not afraid of danger. Kyle, Steve, Bucky. The three of them were ready, standing side by side on the edge of the peak in the freezing wind, looking down at the hundreds of meters of drop on the hillside, patiently waiting for the arrival of the enemy train. Chapter 38. Runaway train, woo woo woo, quang la quang la. On the railway surrounded by snow-capped mountains, the whistle of an old train came from far away, faintly echoing in the sky above the snow-capped peaks. A long steel cable hangs down from the peak, spanning a drop of 100 meters. The other end is tied to the hillside of the opposite snow-capped mountain, with the bottom of the cable facing the sky above the railway tracks. It should feel like swinging on a swing. Kyle shrugged, stood on the edge of the peak, and held on to the iron ring device that slid down the iron chain with both hands. Steve warned, "Be careful. If we miss the 10-second gap, we will all be hit by the train." "Okay, I'll find the right time." Bucky nodded. He obviously didn't have the extraordinary physique of a super soldier, carrying an energy gun as a weapon to kill the enemy. "Guys, get ready." Fury had been watching through a telescope. When he saw the traces of an enemy train on the rails below the camera, he raised his voice and said, "It's going very fast. Get ready. 321 GO. As soon as Fury gave the order, Kyle jumped off the peak first, grabbed the iron ring, and slid quickly down the cableway. Steve and Bucky followed quickly behind him. Whoosh! The cold wind mixed with snowflakes blew in his face, and Kyle, dressed in black, broke through the wind and snow. He looked at the front of the train passing by the tracks below him at high speed. Then he loosened his hands and landed easily on the roof in the middle of the train. Tap, tap. Steve and Bucky also landed on the top of the train one after another. The train was running at high speed. Next to the railway track was the bottom of the snowy valley. The difference of hundreds of meters was terrifying. "Kyle, how do you want to act?" Steve asked, knowing Kyle well. He knew that even though he was a major, he still liked to fight alone in operations like this. "It's very simple. I'll enter from the middle carriage of the train first to attract the attention of the enemy guards, and you two will rush to the front of the train carriage and capture the target alive in the cab," Kyle said, and without waiting for Steve's response, he climbed down from the side of the train carriage in a swift and decisive manner, twisted the handlebars, and forced his way through the carriage door. Kyle had only been in the train car for a few seconds when he heard the invasion warning broadcast, the laser bursts of energy weapons, and the tragic cries of enemy soldiers. Bucky on the roof of the car shook his head. Really? Just as simple and crude as ever. Let's go. Steve was used to it. He waved his hand forward, lowered his body, used the roof as a passage, and approached the carriage at the front of the train. Inside the middle carriage of the train, under bright lights, the cold bodies of 5 fully armed German guards lay across the floor of the carriage. Some of them had their hands chopped off, some were cut in half, and the most beautiful deaths were caused by a stab through the heart. Several energy weapons glowing blue and stained with blood were scattered all over the ground. Most of the German guards had lost their vitality before they could even use these high-end weapons against the intruders. Tick-tock. Kyle had a cold, expressionless face, his left hand holding a long sword that was bleeding. The vibranium arm guard on his right hand was still smoking, and his leather military boots slowly stepped on the pool of scarlet and sticky blood. He glanced around at the piles of supplies in the carriage, and suddenly looked up at the corner of the carriage, where a surveillance camera with a faint red light was on. "Did you notice me?" Kyle sneered, bent down, and picked up an energy pistol weapon that was flashing blue light from the ground. He took aim and pulled the trigger. A tiny blue laser shot out from the muzzle, and the surveillance probe turned into dust. The other end of the monitoring equipment is at the main driving cabin of the train. A bald, bespectacled middle-aged professor and the train driver both had genuine fear in their eyes that came from the depths of their souls. "The executioner is really here. We are dead. Dead." The guards on the train can't stop him. The train driver's mouth and tongue seemed to be frozen, and his voice was shaking and out of tune. Major Kyle of the U.S. Army is not only well known in the United States, but also well known in Germany. However, this reputation was built on the corpses of thousands of German soldiers. The German army hated Kell so much that they even wanted to send bombers from the front lines to carry out a carpet-style destruction operation. He was like a nightmare that haunted the Germans. Even the bravest and most ruthless soldiers would be terrified when they heard the name Kyle before the battle. "Shut up. Send more guards to guard the main cab." The bald professor slapped the driver in the face, staring at the distorted monitor screen. His eyes behind his glasses showed crazy emotions, and he murmured in a low voice, "Hurry up. You're just in time. Even if I die this time, I'll drag you to hell with me." After destroying the surveillance camera, Kyle looked around in the car and began to extract the cards to search for supplies. The reason why he likes to fight alone is that he has too many secrets about the cards and doesn't want to expose them too much to others, even if the other party is Steve. Secondly, only by fighting alone can you come across high-quality enemy supplies and draw cards from them. Especially with the help of the Hydra organization developed independently by Germany, after they started to manufacture new energy weapons, many military weapons and supplies reached the quality of blue item cards. Chargeable laser gun, enhanced energy pistol, gemstone residual energy. All blue item cards that can be drawn appear directly in Kyle's field of vision within 3 meters. "There's actually a box of gem energy left," Kyle blinked in surprise. This was an unexpected gain. A box of gem energy often contained nearly 25 blue item cards. Sometimes, even after capturing a base factory, you may not be able to find even half a box of gemstone residual energy blocks, which are the raw energy materials. Steve and Bucky, these two should be able to easily deal with the guards in the cab. Kyle muttered softly, but his mind did not pause. At the speed of extracting the remaining energy of a gem every 3 seconds, he converted all the energy blocks in the box into cards and stored them in the card space. For more than a minute, no enemy guards came over to interrupt the card drawing rhythm. Kyle had finished drawing and was standing up when the train suddenly shook and trembled in huge amounts, causing him to stagger and nearly fall to the ground. "What's going on?" Kyle frowned, quickly opened the car door, and stuck his head out to look at the front of the train. Huge amounts of gas were blown out of the front carriage of the train. Thick smoke was billowing out of the cab, and red flames could be seen flickering. More importantly, the speed of the steel train was constantly increasing and soon exceeded the speed limit, so that a large number of sparks were splashed from the wheels and rails under the train. Chapter 39, Do You Believe Me? The shrill sound of the whistle cut through the sky, completely breaking the tranquility of the glacier mountains. The out-of-control steel train rushed forward, emitting thick smoke, and its speed on the rails continued to soar, with no sign of slowing down. Steve screwed up? Kyle raised his eyebrows and was about to climb out onto the roof and rush to the front of the train. It can be seen that after the train is about to enter a tunnel that is only large enough for the train body, it quickly returns to the carriage and closes the door. As the train entered the tunnel, the light in the carriage dimmed, leaving only a faint light. Kyle looked at the aisle inside the train carriage. Each end of the aisle was equipped with automatic mechanical doors, which were now completely locked from the main driver's cab. I can't take care of that anymore. Kyle thought about it, and a translucent blue item card appeared between his outstretched fingers. The next moment, an energy laser gun quickly returned to its real form and was held in his hand. He pointed the gun at the closed door of the carriage and pulled the trigger to fire a shot. Laugh! The locked mechanical door was immediately shattered by the laser. Kyle stepped through the passage with an energy laser gun in hand and quickly rushed to the driver's cab at the front of the train. TSK, TSK, TSK. Kyle used his energy laser gun to blast away the closed doors of the train carriages along the way, so that the carriages were in a mess after he passed by. We should be there soon. Kyle looked at the fifth door and fired another shot from the energy laser gun at the door. The steel automatic mechanical door was directly melted by the laser, and the energy explosion also blew away the thick smoke in the front cab. This is when the tragic scene in the cab came into view. Even Kyle opened his eyes wide in shock. On both sides of the cab, huge amounts of holes were blown out of the steel train hull, and sparks from the tunnel walls and wheels could be seen passing by quickly outside. The floor of the cab was littered with broken bones stained with scarlet blood, as if someone had committed suicide by acting as a human bomb. Thick smoke and flames came from the train's driving console. Steve was sitting tiredly on the floor of the carriage. Next to him was a bald professor who had fainted. Kyle recognized him as the target of this operation. "Kyle, you're here." Steve looked up at Kyle, his fists clenched so hard that they made a crackling sound, as if he was enduring huge amounts of pain. "What on earth happened here? How'd it get like this? Are you injured?" Kyle threw away the energy laser gun in his hand, walked over quickly to help him up, and asked as if he realized something, "By the way, where's Bucky?" "It's all my fault. I underestimated them." Steve sighed, unable to suppress his sadness, and said, "Bucky, in order to save me, he was thrown out of the train by the blasting wind pressure of the bomb on the train driver and fell into the bottom of a snowy valley hundreds of meters high. Or suffer the same fate. The Winter Soldier." Kyle kept a straight face, knowing that although Bucky was not dead, his future would be more painful than death, as he was controlled by a foreign government and turned into an inhumane war machine for more than half a century. Kyle was not good at comforting people, so he could only pat Steve on the shoulder and said, "Think positively. As a soldier, sacrifice on the battlefield is very common. Don't let this affect the mission." "I know." Steve took a deep breath, carried the unconscious bald doctor on his shoulders, and said, "But the mission is accomplished. The target wanted to bite off the poison capsule in his mouth and commit suicide, but I knocked him out. It seems that the intelligence is correct. The members of the Hydra organization all like to hide poison in their mouths and commit suicide." Kyle nodded and thought, "Then now we just need to take the target person and evacuate here safely." "That's the problem." Steve showed a bitter smile on his resolute face, pointing to the driving platform with thick smoke and flames. The powerful explosion not only blew apart the steel body on both sides of the carriage, but also destroyed the train control console. Now the train is in a state of continuous speed increase and out of control. Indeed, the train is now traveling at a speed of more than 150 kilometers per hour and is still speeding up. It is impossible for it to stop. Kyle looked at the sparks flying from the wheels and quickly thought of a solution. Traveling at such a high speed, even if he jumped off the train, his life would be in danger, not to mention that there were either steep cliffs or snowy valleys on both sides of the train. If you were alone, you can just use stealth to force teleport. But there was Steve and a target hostage. It just wouldn't work. Steve gave his own suggestion. "It seems that we can only go to the rear carriage of the train and separate the connection between the locomotive and the rear carriage, hoping that this will stop the train carriage." Kyle shook his head and rejected it. "You're overthinking it. If I remember the glacier map here correctly, the train will have to turn right after it exits this long, straight mountain tunnel. At this speed, even if the front of the train separates from the carriage will still not be able to stop in time and will derail and fall. Steve asked solemnly, "What should we do? We can't just do nothing and wait for the train to derail and fall, right?" Kyle was silent for a moment, then suddenly stared at Steve and asked, "Do you believe me?" "Ah." Steve was slightly stunned, then answered without hesitation, "Of course. In this world, if I don't trust you, who else can I trust? Then don't do anything." Kyle smiled mysteriously. After making the decision, he felt much more relaxed, and his face was relaxed without any sense of crisis. He said confidently, "When the train rushes out of the tunnel and derails, I tell you to jump. You take the hostages and jump down the cliff." "Jump off a cliff?" Steve looked at Kyle in surprise, still confused. The bottom of the cliff was not a deep river, but a hard frozen river surface. "You believe me?" Kyle shrugged. "Okay, if you tell me to jump, I'll jump." Steve didn't ask any more questions. He carried the target hostage on his shoulders and faced the tunnel wall ready. It took only a dozen seconds. When the train, traveling at a speed of over 200 kilometers per hour, quickly reached the end of the tunnel, the darkness was instantly dissipated by the daylight from the outside. The blinding white light outside made Steve squint his eyes. At the same time, the train was shaking violently, and the wheels broke apart completely under the flying sparks. Crack! The roaring train was supposed to turn along the track, but due to the excessive speed, it suddenly deviated from the track at the corner and rushed towards the overhanging cliff. The cold wind, mixed with snowflakes, rushed into the carriage like crazy, and I felt a sense of weightlessness as if the train was about to fall. "Steve, jump!" Kyle jumped out of the car before he could finish his words. Without a second thought, Steve carried the hostage and resolutely followed Kyle to jump out of the train and fall down from a cliff hundreds of meters high. Chapter 40: The eve of the decisive battle hundreds of meters above the bottom of the glacier valley. Kyle and Steve, who was carrying the hostage, were falling rapidly in the cold wind and snow. A dozen or so carriages of a train not far away also exploded and rolled down to the bottom of the mountain. I have experienced high-altitude falls like this before, and I have parachuted from airplanes many times, but this time I was not wearing any parachuting equipment at all. No matter how strong a super soldier's physique is, it is only within the range of the most perfect value that humans can achieve, and their ability to withstand fatal crises is only 3 to 5 times that of a normal human. Falling from a cliff hundreds of meters high, this should be a fatal situation. The moment before jumping out of the car, Steve still couldn't figure out.
No more novels? Take part in the voting. The most requested novels and those with the most likes will be chosen for publication on euroaudiobooks.com. There, I can upload as much as I want without the risk of receiving a strike. Our 18 novels and other content that exceed what is morally acceptable are only published on Patreon or the free novels page. Remember, the site is funded by donations on Ko-fi and Patreon memberships.